Parasocial with Don Benitez. Ali the AI says, "Hi Don, I hope you had a good day." Today was good, thank you. Whatever says, Don is probably getting his soda or whatever. No, I was making sure the camera angle was alright. Ali the AI says, "Anywhere up to 12 minutes is considered fashionably late." Okay. Catalino says, "Late, I'm sorry." Whatever the government says, period. Okay. Ali the AI says, "It's about building suspense." No, I wasn't trying to do that. Thui says, "Oh my gosh, hi twin." Hello Thui. Anime says, "Hi." Hello Anime. Copper says, "Don, get off the hub." I wasn't doing that. Whatever says, "Don, did you gain weight?" No. Jonas says, "Are you feeling okay today?" I am. YT says, "First, you're not first." Normal says, "How are you doing, Don?" I'm doing good. Catalino says, "Hi." Hello Catalino. Not quite says, "We arrived." Yeah. Thui says, "Did he miss me?" Again, be honest. Not really. The Real says, "Sup Don, like my profile picture?" Yeah, that's a cute cat. Not quite says, "We arrived for Don." Yeah. Juicebox says, "Sup Donald, I like your new background, thank you." Whatever says, "Don, does Ramon always try to hit on you?" Yeah, just about every stream. Open says, "Young Don Sheldon Benitez live Lady Gaga banana tree." Okay. Not Rody says, "Good morning, Donito Burrito. How was your day?" It was pretty good. Shelly says, "I'm finally early." Okay. A Dalmatian says, "Dang, remember me? I'm a Dalmatian, the one who kept saying whip it out." Your name's familiar. Catalino says, "Hi." Hello Catalino. I've said hi to you like 3 times already. Ali the AI says, "Don, did you get a new headset?" No. Waffly says, "I'm back." Welcome back, Waffly. Whatever says, "Don, do you use YouTube videos as your background?" Look at the description of the video. Anime says, of the stream. Anime says, "Is there something that encouraged you to stream other than money?" Because it's fun. I get to read insane stuff. Jen super chats. Don or Donnie B. I prefer Donnie B. A Dalmatian says, "I remember you had only like 90 views." Okay. Open says, "Donito, Master Beto, Dollars, Bruno Mars." Alright, let me extend the timer. Whatever says, "Finally, I come across Jen again." Okay. Waffly says, "You want a boyfriend?" No, I don't. Jen says, Don, it is." I don't want that. 3am says, "Love the background, it's digging me. I'm glad you like it." Carl says, "It burns when I pee." I'm sorry. Blomper says, "Yo, hello." E-Bike says, "You're fucking gay." Okay. Open says, "Nah, I prefer Donito. I just prefer Don." Normal says, "I don't know what to say." Well, that works. Jen says, "Unamused emoji." Okay. William says, "Are you straight?" Because I'm straight. I am. Tommy says, "Why do you have long hair?" Because I've been procrastinating and getting a haircut. Asayake says, "Hi." Hello. Zian says, "Hi." Hello, Zian. Kay says, "Who's your favorite Stranger Things character?" Billy. I don't know. Says, "I made Donito Bonito." Okay. Kelly says, "How was your day going?" Good. Waffly says, "Are you depressed?" I am not depressed. Axolotl says, "Hi." Hello. Viclixie says, "I fucking hate this." Okay. C. John says, "Do you play Roblox?" I'm not 5 years old. Jen says, "Donito is actually better." Oh wow. EB says, "HU." Okay. Red says, "Good evening" to you too. E-Bike says, "Hi." Hello E-Bike. Dalmatian says, "Painful urination is typically caused by inflammation." Okay. Dilbert says, "You still suck." Okay. Haynen says, "Hello, do you remember me?" I don't. Catalino says, "Bunch of flags." Okay. Liam says, "Hi Donnie, how are you doing?" I feel a little off today for some reason. Kira says, "HO." Okay. Normal says, "Don, do you play any games?" I play Minecraft. Macaroni says, 67. Okay. AI says, "You're my tongue sir." Alright. A Dalmatian says, "Did you change your cooldown?" Yeah, it's 10 seconds now. Sham says, "Ronaldo or Messi?" Petative fruit. Mikey says, "Hi." Hello. Haynen says, "I was the one that asks if you have a good day every time you stream." That's not memorable. Macaroni says, "Are you gay?" I'm not gay. Forma2 says, "I predicted this." Predicted what? Tommy says, How many inches is your TV? I don't know. That's a good question. Luke says, me, Donnie likes it. Okay. Tina says, I love your streams, bro. Thank you. Hayden says, I think he has had a bad day. Okay. Clakey says, are you American? Yes. Annette says, don't like that background. It's so unstable. I think it's cool. Allie says, Don, how's the Minecraft server coming along? It's not coming along. It'll be months until that. I Dare says, best streamer. Thank you. Kanan says, but I hope you have a good day. Thank you. Whatever the government says, super chats. Jen, if I know you IRL, I'd try to hit on you. You like Jen? Okay, good. Top says, do you have a girlfriend? No comment. Goofy says, I hope you had a great day. I did. Vietnam says, I'm furry. Alright. Stevie says, I'm committing arson on Tuesday. Don't do that. Let me extend the timer. Timer extended. Thank you again, whatever the government says. Kelly says, what's your favorite show? Breaking Bad. Two Brains says, I'm racist. Okay. Danielle says, where and how much did you get for the TV? I don't remember. It was like in 2016. Two Brains says, I'm racist. Okay. Rosetta says, I love your videos. Thank you. Whatever the government says, super chats. I'd hit on you first though, Don. So, you're gay? You want... thank you. Tina says, hey bro, can I have $100 please? No. Frock says, NOC. Okay. Porma2 says, crying emoji. What were you predicting? Dalmatian says, alright, how did you get 21 people? And what are you saying? Very Cool says, how do I ask my crush out? You just do it. HTP says, B. Alright. Carson says, happy birthday. No comment. Real Satan says, did you give me your foreskin? Am I circumcised? No comment. Foxy says, you got a VR headset? No. Normal says, Don, what's the Minecraft server IP? Or are you... What? I play Hypixel sometimes. Cool says A. Okay. Pridge says, hello. Hi. Gizzo says, why are these people so weird? Because it's an unmoderated chat. Porma2 says, the unjust proliferation of suppressing chat. You want me to stop, like, lower the cooldown? Cameron says, what inspired you to do YouTube? Partly money. The first captain says, I'm early for once. Yeah. Frock says, looks like an NPC. Okay. Ariana says, angry emoji. Alright. Foxy says, what other games you got? I got GTA 4. I haven't really played it yet. Cherry says, can you tickle me? No. Easyo says E. Okay. Mem-T says, I'm gay. Alright. Myth says, femboy. Okay. Bet says, why you so nonchalant? My personality. Anthony says, pizza. Okay. Macy says, yo, hello. Porma2 says, that Jamie, crazy snipe. I don't know what you're saying. Titio says, what's your favorite day of the year? I don't know. That's a weird question. King says, please me. There you go. Star says, hee hee, here. What? Rat says, do you support LGBTQ? I do. Catalino says, Hindi, Indian. Okay. Carson says, do you like turtles? Yeah. Mateo says, what's your favorite game? Rainbow Six Siege is good. Fell says, Charlie Kirk is alive. Okay. Brooke says, do you think 67 is dead? No, I see that often. Liam says, I thought like $20 gave you mod. Did you remove that? I did. Ariana says, ABC. Okay. Red says, what is your favorite holiday? Oh, Thanksgiving. Juju says, Don, life is going great for me, and I might bake cookies. Awesome. And I'm glad to hear your life is going good. Gojo says, are you gay? I'm straight. Eagles says, blue. It is blue. Blue Bulb says, haven't seen you in a while. What's up? Stargazer super chats. Nice background, Mr. Don Benitez. Thank you. You like the fractals? Thank you. Timer extended. John says, do you like Ottercre? What's that? Minnie says, what's up? Hi. Isabella says something. I don't want to pronounce that. Jorge says, I rub beans on my body. Okay. Cherry says, do you want crack? No. Cold Slayer says, got water. I have 3 water bottles in total. Film says, dude, I haven't seen this channel in a while. Also, is the homophobia still going in the chat? Unfortunately, yeah. Adrian says, motor oil. Okay. Normal says, Don, are you in Java or Bedrock? Of course, Java. The first captain says, I used to have a pet tortoise, but it died when I was 14, coincidentally a few days after eating sour lettuce. Okay. Whatever the government says, I think I scared off Gen. Yeah, maybe. Mickey says, do you do this all the time in your streams? Yes. Juju says, yeah, I mentioned I was kind of down before. Now we are awesome. Landon says, hi. Hello, Landon. Miss says, happy birthday, Don. Okay. It's not my birthday. Philly says, what your favorite MLB team? I couldn't name you one. SS says, are you Christian? I'm not. Will says, 67. Okay. Jesus says, are you single? I keep my relationship status private. Homeless says, yo. Hello. Allie says, Don, do you support the new acronym MMIWG? Are you trying to get canceled? Don't. Billy says, I'm a person 67. Okay. Silly says, how is the birthday going? It's not my birthday. Juju says, is the gang here? Well, Pormatu's here and the first captain. Burger says he's probably single. Okay. Owen says, are you gay? I'm heterosexual. Nathan says, what? Ahmed says, hi. Hello. Mass says, Grox is bullying villagers in Minecraft. I think I gotta check out his videos. Jordy says, hi. Hello, Jordy. Cold Slayer says, just a heads up to gays. Don is straight. Yeah. Demarius says, hi. Hello. Rat says, what is heterosexual? Why don't you look it up? FDB says, shake it. No. Remember says, hi. Hello, Remember. Kobe says, Jesus loves you. Thank you. Cassie says, hi. Hello, Cassie. Lummy says, straight gay. What? JG says, Enrique says, hi. Hello, Enrique, with the Red Dead profile picture. Eagle says, God saves. Okay. Son of Thor says, evening, Dawn. I just chased Allie the AI here. Watch her. Okay. Ryder says, hi. Hello, Ryder. Cassidy says, hi. Hello. Bob says, what's the stream about? It's about your chat messages. Remember says, hi. Hello, Remember. Allie the AI says, Dawn, it's actually a real thing. Really? That's crazy. The first captain says, don't be fooled. Dawn still owns Bedrock. I do. Remember says, hi. Hello, Remember. I already said hi to you. Ellie says, your edit flops after 2 hours. What? Isaiah says, who are you? I'm Don. Ziffle says, hello. Hi. Jeremy says, hi. Hello, Jeremy. Ocean says, read my chats. I just did right there. Trek says, cool TV. Thank you. Jackson says, hi. Hello, Jackson. Jamie says, Don gets bitches. Okay. Pormatu says, hi. A lot of people saying hi. Benjamin says, guys, Don, is my femboy friend get leaked? What? Jer says, read my chats. And Ander Dingus. Rachel says, please don't say the N-word again. I don't do that. Wormy says, if you had to choose to play one game for the rest of your life, Minecraft. Haley says, hi. Hello, Haley. Always says, do you know what Gemini Core is? No, it sounds stupid. Isaiah Shuitt, super chats. Great to see you again, but still waiting on you to let us out of the basement. Crying emoji. There's nobody in my basement named Isaiah. You're not there. SS says, do you support Christians? Kind of. Jeremy says, taco juice. Alright. Jandriel says, hey, daddy. Hello. Pop says, how are you doing? I am doing good. Normal Dude says, Don, did you know in 2029 the climate time ends? I did not. Nathan says, no, he don't. What? X17 says, happy Thursday, brother. To you too. Burrito says, Mr. Beast is my fan. I don't believe you. Son of Thor says, the hair is growing on me, damn it. Awesome. Pekka says, sup, Bio. Hello, Pekka. Honda says, hi. Hello, Honda. Levi says, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Alright. Acid says, hello, hi. Kish says, hi. Hello, Kish. Warmy says, wait, what do you mean names? I have no one in my basement. Lucy says, what's your favorite holiday? Halloween is one of my favorites. Static says, hey, hi. Jamie says, read my questions. Are you a Republican? I don't get into politics. Aiden says, do you touch people? Only with consent. Outlet says, hi. Hello, Outlet. Mr. Ante says, have you played Red Dead Redemption 2? Yes. HS says, what's your favorite cereal? Mine's Raisin Bran. I don't eat cereal. Will says, Surons are coming. What does that mean? ATS says, yo, hi. Ariel says, hey Don, how's your Thursday? I feel uncanny today. Clinton says, it looks like you need sleep. No, I don't. The first captain says, yes, Halloween is my favorite. You should dress up, though. Yeah, I didn't last time. Josh says, do you remember me? I don't. Misha says, hi, where are you from? The United States. T-Money says, why aren't you Christian? Why should I be? Easton says, do you miss Charlie Kirk? Well, I'm disappointed that he was killed. That's not good. Alemi says, where does Darth Vader go to get his shoes? I don't know. Nathan says RHR, okay. Huddle says read mine. There you go. Jen Super Chat says, did you turn off slow mode? No, it's still on. There's just lots of people, I guess. Smitty says GG. Alright. It's Eden says, how do I not be suicidal? I hope you get out of that. I'm sorry. Alumi says the Darth Maul. Okay. Isn't that from Jinxie streams? Danielle says, do you watch Dragon Ball? No. It's Eden says, how do I be... I already read that. Gibby says, what's up? Hello, Gibby. Astro says, I'm shiny hunting the soul silver starters. Okay. Chase says GG. Alright. Alex says, have you played GTA 5? I have. Newbie says hi. Hello, Newbie. Gravy says, what is your religion? I'm religionless. Lindsay says, what do you call a gusher? What are you saying? Loot says, I farted. Okay. Xander says, hi. Hello, Xander. B says, hello, Donites. You mind telling what is going on today? I'm a little hungry right now. Timer extended. Thank you again, Jen, for your super chat. Heat says, hi. Hello, Heat. Yup says, are you okay? You look tired. I'm not tired. Jack says, hello again. It's been a while since I've seen your streams. Hello, Jack. Billy says, today is buggy day to burger. Okay. Ashio says, please rate my profile picture. Albert Einstein, 6. Normal says watermelon. Okay. I play says, I like baseball and let me out of the basement. You're not in there. James says, why did the chicken cross the road? Why? Diego says, hi. Hello, Diego. Open says, imagine the big four, Jen, Ramon, Porma2, the first captain, fuse into Megadonito. Okay. ICP says, what's your favorite song? I like Rabbit Hole by Arcade Fire. Sight says, I let all the anomalies out for fun. Good luck, everyone. Okay. Michael says, favorite car? I like cheap, reliable Toyotas. Lindsay says, stop sign emoji. Okay. JR says, hi. Hello, JR. Divine says, would you rather wear a thong for the rest of your life or assless leather chaps? I don't want to think about that. Zane says, hi. Hello, Zane. JR says, favorite food? In-N-Out cheeseburgers. Jay says, hello, Jay. Danny says, remember me? I don't. Normal says, Joe Biden. Okay. YouTube says, what's your Minecraft name? I don't want to say. Fainzin says, yo. Hello, Fainzin. Natalie says, is my profile picture tough? Sure. MS says, do you play War Thunder? I don't. Cemetery says, do you support Donald Trump? I don't get into that, but you can tell me your opinion. Alumi says, religionless but not irreligious. Is there a difference? Jay says, what's your favorite show? Pluribus was nice. Owen says, lol. Okay. Jetty says, do you play Rec Room? No, I'm not 6 years old. The fourth says, any show recommendations? I recommend on YouTube The Phone Losers of America. Porma2 says, Donald Trump has been America's best dictator. Okay. Hot Dog says, hi. Hello, Hot Dog. Aaron says, I'm not gay. Imp. Swear. What? Med says, do you play Roblox? I don't. Ali says, Don, I heard that if you have a heart, you're a liberal, and if you have a brain, you're a conservative. Thoughts? That seems like it makes sense. Gabriel says, hi. Hello, Gabriel. I fart says F. Okay. Over says, do you play Siege? Yeah. Jaco says, pre-recorded. No, obviously not. Billy says, I ate foot to be a hand and fry. What? I play baseball says, I have hantavirus. Okay. Chaina says, if you can stay one age for 100 years, what age would it be? 25. Rogue says, day 2 of asking, can I get a shout out? I don't do shout outs. Bunzo says, you play the show. What are you talking about? Anthony says, are you ignoring me? There's like 100 people here. Foxy says, let me out of your basement. No. I mean, you're not in my basement. Zeros says hi, hello, Zeros. Zephyr says hello, hello, Zephyr. Sight says I just sharded. Okay. God says hi, hi, hello, God. Blueberry says, do you think 67 is bad? I think it's an okay meme. Howie says, do you support Therians and furries? I think they're weird, but Hallelujah says Jesus loves you. Okay. CC says heyo, hello. Stone says, okay. My hawk is small. Flight says hi, hello, Flight. Son of Thor says crap, Gen is gonna throw blows. What? Normal says, Don, what is your favorite fruit? Mine is watermelon. Watermelon is good. I like it with salt. Urban says, I bet read you sentence wrong. I read it correctly. The Reaper says, yo, hello, Reaper. Christine says, fa. Alright. Sabrina says, am I a furry? I hope not. Laura says, hi, hello. Sports says, Ronaldo or Messi. Petative fruit. Payson says, can you do a Scientology speedrun? I'm not that kind of nuisance streamer yet. Your local says, you've been reading everyone but me. Not true. Bloxy says, how do I type? Please help. You figured it out. Ima says, I teach kids in my free time. Alright. Osil says, can you see this? I can. Chantel says, raw. What? Gabby says, are you gay? Not gay. Earl says, ee. Okay. Rayan says, you look good, bro. Thank you. Jordan Riles super chats. Hi. Hello, Jordan. I see your purple profile picture. LT says, I hate you. Okay. Caroline says, can you read this? I can. Pog says, uwu senpai daddy. Alright. Monkey says, I play the French horn. Cool. Poisonous says, watermelon eating a cyan. What? Wendy says, remember me? I don't. Jordan, timer extended because of your super chat. Axel says, hi, Paris, are you depressed? Not depressed. LKN says, P. Diddy. Alright. PD says, can you see me? I can. Bobette says, are you roaring? No. Beast says, okay, sounds good. Before I start, do you have any questions for me, Donites? What video games do you play? Cream says, what's up, man? Hello, Cream. The Real says, Oppa, Gangnam Style. Alright. Monkey says, remember me? It's Michael. I don't. Bang says, do you play Roblox? No, I'm an adult. BJ says, do you like football? No. Raphael says, yo, my Xbox just walked outside. Okay. Mila says, peeper. Okay. L2 says, ting tongue to her. Alright. Sienna says, hi, hello. Holy says, was Noya right? Who's that? Neela says, do you like vanilla wafers? Yeah, I do. Bo says, do you like the Corey? What? Gen super chats, I miss you. I mean, you're in the chat right now. We've never met in real life, if that's what you're implying. Timer extended. The Clip Boy says, hi, hello, Clip. Jimmy says, how big is that TV behind you? I don't know the inches. Jamie says, can I wash my winky in your kitchen sinky? No permission. Jeremy says, I'ma walk my fish. Alright. Random says, Mr. Beast is rich. Yeah. Zubul says, LO. Hi. G-Spock says, why do you change your voice sometimes? Shit's hilarious. Because I wanna mix things up. Allison says, the fuck? What? John says, are you gay? I am not gay. Random says, Diddy ASMR, please. No, what even is that? User says, Drake is dropping. Alright. Killer says, do you eat pigeons? No. CC says, sorry, I got to go. I'm folding the dishes. See ya. Good for being responsible. Caden says, hello. Hi. TB says, the first one is the most interesting one in my collection, and the third one was my favorite. So I'm in love with yours. What? Content says poopy diaper. Alright. FN says, what is your religion? Not Christian, nothing. Dylan says, my back hurts. Okay. One Love says, I have 900 kids in my basement. Okay. Tristan says, bro, this is my favorite live. Thank you. Connor says, I know that you're Mr. Beast. I'm not Mr. Beast. Also says, cake is cake even if it has a candle. No. Sarah says, do you like FNAF? I don't. Katara says, looks miserable, but a great idea for engagement. Alright. Kelly says, my dog has a dead rat in her mouth. Take it out. Spirit says, a good murder documentary or story to read or watch. I watched a documentary about a TikToker that tortures plecofish. Grayson says balls itch. Okay. Oh, is it bitch? Or Scary says, do you like football? I don't. May says, bye, I'm a walk my shark. Okay. Killer says, do you eat hippos? I don't. Rosa says, hi. Hello, Rosa. The Good says, what do you do for fun? I edit videos. Zach says, you're cool. Thank you. Jen super chats. You forgot to extend time, Donito. I still miss you. Okay. Time extended. Naz says, Sui. Alright. DIY says, have you played Red Dead Redemption or Uncharted? Not Uncharted. Ryan says, Q. Okay. Striving says, I need to goon. Then go ahead. Carly says, Palm Beach Pete. Alright. Tony says, wet feet or cold feet? Cold feet. Liam says, do you watch JJK? I'm not a weeaboo. Hey says, uwu. Okay. Allison says, hola. Hi. Tristan says, hey, do you like little kids in your basement? No, I don't. Bryson says, can you say hi to me? Hi. Parasocial says, I'm a gooner. I will finally admit it. That's not me. That's a fake. The First Captain says, I kinda miss when 80 viewers at once for Don streams was considered a lot, but now I know Don wants publicity. I'm sorry. Susie says, are you gamer? I am. The Awesome says, Pibble. Alright. Central says, the only way I know you know what yay is. What are you saying? Can you type properly? Emma says, what is your favorite color? Gray. Austin says, favorite music artist? I like Radiohead. Barry says, are you 67? I'm not. Drake says, what's your favorite Marvel movie, bro? The first Thor movie. MB says, Skibbity Toilet. Okay. Alex says, rip XXX. Yeah. Warmy says, what was your favorite school year? Like what grade? 5th grade. Liam says, Marvel or DC? Marvel. Zubal says, thank you so much for mentioning me. I subbed. Thank you. Anna says, say hi to me. Hello. Emma says, bro, why are people trolling? Because it's fun. Tristan says, hey, why am I the only one you change your answer on? What are you talking about? The Cardinal says, are you not gay on opposite day? No, it's the opposite. Zay says, hi. Hello, Zay. Zoe says, I don't know. Okay. Hot Dog says, alright. Manliness says, I love femboys. Okay. Bear says, are you cool? I don't know. I'm Put says, job? Maybe. Real Devious says, yo, you remember me still, right? Your name is familiar. Henry says, hi. Hello. Shervanna says, Diddy. Okay. Brody says, I love kids. Alright, I hope in an okay way. Carly says, Bomb Beach Pete. Okay. The Freak says, I have a concussion. Alright. Fairless says, what's up, bro? Hello, Fairless. Boss says, never seen a stream like this before. Kinda cool. Thank you. Porma2 says, I might be crazy, but I think the timer has looped. I think you're crazy. Triple says, do you play Bite by Night? I haven't heard of that. 123 says, I stuck my pee-pee in a toaster and toasted it. Okay. LX says, what's your favorite video game? I like griefing in Rainbow Six Siege. Lucas says, hi. Hello, Lucas. KJW says, yo, what's up? This kind of dream is actually pretty cool. Stream? Thank you. Savannah says, gink. Alright. Rob says, did Epstein kill himself? I believe in the mainstream media. Yes. Susie says, play The Last of Us. No. The Name says, story or online games. I'm a sucker for online. Zoodle says, ah, okay. I'm Real says, I pulled out my dingleberry out of my butthole and started eating it. Alright. Star says, have you ever broke character on stream? I don't really play character. I have had insects bother me, though. Thank you again, Isaiah, for your super chat earlier. Bob says, hello. Hello, Bob. Ven says, is this a Silk Song reference? Never played that. Barry says, are you gay? Straight. Ray says, bunch. What? Striving says, will you goon? I won't. Not says, hi. Hello, Not. Everett says, imagine if you imagine something while imagining something. That's too much. Jen says, do you have Riz like triple teaser her? I don't. 60 says, do you ride bikes? Not motorcycles. Brenda says, will you show your underwear? I'm not that kind of streamer. Hamza says, BG. What? Ven says, will you play Silk Song? I won't. Vip says, how can you not play Silk Song? I'm not too much into video games nowadays. Join says, what's up, bro? You weird. Okay. Tristan says, why am I the only one you change your voice on? Because you give off a nerdy vibe. Beld says, hi. Hello, Beld. Fecal Matter says, hi, hello. Normal says, did you know that hamsters are hamsters? I did. Dinkle says, do you like grapes? Yeah. Gray says, Coke stare. I have that? Alright. Striving says, I like your stream. Thank you. Someone says, you love mustache guy. Do I love that guy? I don't know who that is. Sayed says, bro, got an update. I did. Frost says, do you like pickles? Yeah. Shravana says, do you like Jolly Ranchers? Yes. Mr. Honey says, what's your favorite drink? Coke. Just a Guy says, when can I leave the basement? Dude, you're not in my basement. If you are, call the police. Caden McLean super chats $1. Thank you, Caden. Timer extended. Kawai says, I'm gonna fart in your eyeball and I'm gonna give you pink eye. Don't do that. Dark says, are you emo? I don't consider myself that. Fake says, are you vegan? Not vegan. Ashley says, do you like Yoshi? Yeah, he's cute. Vi says, hi. Hello, Vi. Femboy says, are you emo? I'm not emo. Crazy says, so am I. What? Cardi says, man, you're just chill. Thank you. Photoshoot says, you let me have some basement. What are you saying? R says, I subbed. Okay. Cindy says, yo. Hello, Cindy. Isabella says, do you like to play games outside? No, I don't. Tyrone says, sweat equity. What? Mr. Fanta says, yo, what's up? Do you remember me? I don't. Random says, Mr. Beast broke my TV. Okay. My name says, can you read my comment? There you go. Stephanie says, keep up the good work, man. I will. Chasing says, nerd. Alright. Mr. Carl says, do you eat humans? I'm not like Jeffrey Dahmer. Strongest Cheeto super chats. Can't watch. Gotta water my dog and walk my plant. I don't really understand that, but it sounds like you're being responsible, so good on you. Timer extended. Jad says, yo. Hello, Jad. Son of Thor says, Magic 8 Ball said, yes. The next commenter stands while shitting. Wed says, so you like football? I don't, but apparently you like... Nina super chats, ooh-woo. Alright, Nina, ooh-woo. Someone says, you're built like Megamind. Alright. Goon says, what's your favorite cartoon? I like Avatar The Last Airbender. B says, what's behind you? A TV. DMD says, triple T. Alright. Bean says, I'm a bean. That's correct. PJ says, hi. Hello, PJ. And Nina, let me extend the timer on your behalf. Timer extended. Bible super chats $1. Thank you, Bible. Timer extended. PJ says hi. Hello, PJ. Ramen says, do you like water? Of course. Nimi says cheese. Okay. Stephanie says, do you do this for a living? No. Liam says, do you wiffle ball? I haven't tried that. Shamana says, what's good? Hope you have a good day. You too. Random says, fuck. Alright. Zelda says, explain the psychological trick with the TV behind you. Yeah? I mean, it definitely increases engagement, but also it just looks cool. MTB Red Bull unofficial super chats $2 Canadian. Thank you. Timer extended. The Alex Troyan super chats. Will you ever do Baldi's Basics if you do gaming? If I do gaming, I won't do that. I'm not interested in Baldi's Basics. Timer extended. Levi says, I just farted on my dog. Alright. Savior says, hi. Hello. Liz says, these people are so dumb. Yeah, some of them. Nova says, hello. Hello, Nova. Juicel says, pink or brown nipple. I'm not going to provide a preference. KY says, I told the entire village about my channel. Is that good? That I appreciate. I like the persistence. Jonathan says, do you play Marvel Rivals? I don't. Parasocial says, rub yo 1 inch on a cheese grater. I'm not going to do that. Bible super chats. Do you like baseball? I've never played baseball, and I never got into watching it, so I don't. Fox says hi. Hello, Fox. Aiden says duel. What do you mean duel? Dog says, do you play Minecraft? I do. The Positive says anything. That works. Just Viking says, name an NFL player. Tom Brady, the guy who kisses his children. Timer extended on your super chat. Thank you again, Bible. I appreciate it. Casey says like. Okay. Aiden says in Rivals. I don't play Marvel Rivals. Gayblock says, what's your favorite penis? My own. Natalie says hi. Hello, Natalie. Stephanie says, how are you just reading them and not losing your breath? Because I breathe in between. Big says hi. Hello, Big. How's it going, Big Lepo? I hope your day is going good. My computer is lagging right now, so I'm just lingering on your chat message. Almighty says, did you know worms breathe through their skin? I did not know that. The Alex says, well, super chats, darn you, Don. Sorry, Baldi's Basics just doesn't look appealing. Timer extended. Immortal super chats, do you play Valorant? If you don't, try it. No, never played Valorant, never played CSGO. Timer extended. Toka says, well, super chats, hey, need to go open my fridge and live in there. Don't go in your fridge and live in there. That's a spell for disaster. Timer extended. Seriously, don't do that. Connor says, are you a Nazi? Not a Nazi. Eric says, hello. Hello, Eric. Jayheim says hi. Hello, Jayheim. Fyrico says napalm. Alright. Dark says, alright. Dart says, my dog shit in my cheeks. Now they are sweaty. Alright. Stet says you play GTA. I have like 1,000 hours in GTA Online. 3 Point says, how much have you made from doing this? $7,000. CC says, I'm in your walls. No, you're not. Donut says, drink water. I will do that soon. AD says, do you know K-pop? I've heard about it. Kyle says, do you know what Love Doll Toy Factory is? Is that a sex toy thing? Ariana says, sex... Is it? Waffle Live Super Chats $2 and says, True Worlds will defeat Roblox and David Bazuki. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not in that world. I don't play Roblox. I don't know what True Worlds is, but okay. Timer extended. Sabrina says, ooh, I'm a furry. Alright. Evie says, do you like Arctic monkeys? Haven't tried them out. Bentley says, please goon for me. I'm not a pornographer. AA says, bro, what? Jackal says, skibbity toilet. Okay. Shavana says, hi. Hello, Shavana. Emery says, ate mac and cheese out of my pants pocket. Napoleon Dynamite. Jen says, what's your career outside YouTube? I try to keep that private. Mr. Polar says, how's your day going? It's going solid. Naruto Pro super chats $1. Thank you. I see Ronaldo in your profile picture. Timer extended. Dutch says, you cool or awesome sauce? Awesome sauce. Jackal says, skibbity toilet. Okay. The Son of Thor says, Brad hasn't been since he visited Donito's base. I haven't seen him in a while. Levi says, do you fish? I don't fish. Hickory says, release the kids in the basement. There's nobody there. There's nobody there. Crypt says, hi. Hello, Crypt. Gas says, is this the strat for viewer retention? Sure. Alis says, hi. Hello, Alis. Lack says, can you show ass? I don't do that. M. Johnson says, so you think the monitors make you cool? I think it looks cool. The Great says, hi. Hello, Great. The Alex Troy in Super Chats, how about Pizza Tower? It's a 10 out of 10 on Steam. Where it keeps on zooming in. I don't think that game looks interesting. Thank you, though. Timer extended. Mike says, congrats, bro. 800 watching. Okay. Biker says, Jesus died for us. Alright. Flick says, can you please shout me out? My name is Mike Hawk. Okay. Fat says, I goon to water droplets. Alright. Not says, can you play something else on the screen? I think that looks cool behind me. Wither says, what's your favorite food? Big Macs are great. S says, super chats, watching Tentacles at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday is crazy work. What are you talking about? It's not even Tuesday. Anyways, timer extended. The Real says, I see you. I see you too. Naruto says, super chats $1. Thank you again for your second super chat, Naruto. Matthew says, I goon with Diddy. Okay. Connor says, are you part of Soviet Union? I am not. Steven says, if you're homeless, just buy a house. That's not how it works. Elk super chats, I hope you're having a good week. You deserve it. Thank you. I hope you're having a good week too. Timer extended. Will says, you're the best. Thank you, Will. Steph says, do you fart on Doritos and eat it? I don't. Sarn super chats, have you watched Kingdom of Heaven yet? Remember the director cut? If not, I haven't watched it yet. I know there's like a famous meme in there, like the guy with the hand. I don't like that I know it from a meme. It kind of makes me not want to watch it. Timer extended. I like Fortnite says, can I goon on you? No comment. Spooky says, do you watch anime? I don't. Lucas says, never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. Okay. Bible super chat says, super chats, do you believe in God? I don't. Timer extended. By the way, I think you super chatted earlier, but I missed it. I'm sorry about that. I'll add time for that one. Game mode super chats says, bless y'all. Thank you for the super chat, and bless you too. The Great says hi. Hello, The Great. RG says, I'm gooning to the screen behind you right now. You find that arousing? DB says, are you geeked? I'm not. Lummy says, do you miss Holden 2 cocks? T4 says, opinion on femboys, not my thing. Zach says, you're weird. Okay. Check says, are you awesome? I try to be. Pengy says, did you know pickles have dicks? I don't. Jaco says, the fuck? What? Gret says, are you tough like super tough? I don't know. Cold Slayer says, do you like my profile picture? Yeah, I do. It's cold. Ziff says, I'm in your walls. No, you're not. Parasocial says, say vinegar without the VI. I'm definitely not going to do that. PJ says, good night. Good night to you. Carrot says, opinion on toe. I find my toes useful. Big Mouse says, hello. Hello, Big Mouse. Talon says, okay. Gas Boy says, I'm jerking my candle aggressively and waxing all over my phone. It sounds like you're having a good time. Bone says, have you played the Freak Circus? I haven't. Sarn super chats, you should watch it to see if you think the Hospitaller Knight is an angel or not. That sounds interesting, but that meme, like, I don't know why, but it just makes me not want to watch it. It's weird. Timer extended. Nevea says E. Okay. Stephanie says, is 67 really Ohio Ridge yet? What does that mean? Sarah says, what is this hypno toad background you got going on? You can find the link in the description. Sab says, I goon to toe pics. Glitch says, suck it. What? I'm not doing that. Q says, you play Siege? Yeah, I do. Pseudo says, can you say my channel name? I said part of it. The Great says, it's the Great Buttered Toast, not great. What do you... FV says, do you know Yutta? I don't know what that is. Connor says, did you know about the it's really cool? What are you saying? Chardra super chats $1. Thank you. I see your anime girl profile picture. Timer extended. 09 says, say racial slur. Not doing that. Roman says, hey. Hello, Roman. US says, Trump or Biden. I don't get into politics. 823 says, I'm jacking off, but pee came out instead of sperm. Okay. Mia says, do you watch a gay gotcha? I don't. CL4 says, can you please see me? I see you right now. Narco super chats 200 huffs. Thank you, Narcos. Timer extended. God says, are you gay? I am not gay. Ford says, hi. Hello, Ford. Tristan says, hey, I'm not a nerd, I'm a gangster. Okay. Official says, hi. Hello, Official. Hell says, I think you only read sub people's comments. No, anyone can be read. The Kitten says, new sub. Okay, thank you. Q says, my mom called me sped. Sorry. Operator says, opinion on SFS. I don't know what that is. By the way, I'm making an announcement right now. The timer is now locked. I'm no longer increasing the timer. Mr. Diddy says, men. Okay. CZ says, hey, my door accidentally wrote this. How is that possible? Hello Kitty says, please shout out. I'll subscribe. I don't do shout outs. I Like Fish says, how has your day been? Solid. The Positive says, I killed my cat, but you ain't reading this one, so might That's horrible. TB Tyler super chats. The sky is blue because of the ocean, but how? That's not the science. That's fake. Sarn super chats. Last one. Give me a movie recommendation, bro. Babette's Feast. Nutsack says, do you like my username? I don't. Tiki says, do you like African monkeys? Something. No comment. Paco says, I am jorking it to you. Alright. Adventuring says, scream 67 as loud as you can for 250. No deal. Chong says, are you related to El Chapo? I am not. Queekin says, my mom called me. Again, I'm sorry to hear that. Narco super chats. Describe yourself in 3 words, Berchacho. I don't know. I'll say this. I spend way too much time on the internet. I'm chronically online. The Mad says, favorite operator? Blitz. Doctor says, what's your favorite type of car? Cheap, reliable cars. Who is Jen? Super chats $1. Thank you. Who is Jen? Maria says, I fucking did sex in the bed. That's where most people do it. RZ says, do you listen to Drake? I don't. Official says, favorite time you licked my feet? I don't lick feet. Spooky says, what's your favorite type of drink? Coke. Pack says, are you an alpha? I don't know. Just a guy says, God loves you. Thank you. Rice says, goon. No. Dylan says, do you grind Fortnite? I used to in 2018. The goat says, I'm special. Alright. Natalie says, HHH. Okay. Bowie says, how are you doing, bro? I'm doing excellent. Cassandra says, do you play Blade Ball in Roblox? I'm not 9 years old. I don't play Roblox. ATT says, why are you like this? Genetics. OG says, do you like Sea of Thieves? I don't. Oreo says, can you say 67? There you go. Pack says something. Okay. TB Tyler super chats. Have you seen Pink Guy Raps tweets? No. I have seen Pink Guy, like, where he's, like, being silly in public, like, being a nuisance in public. I remember those days. Luke says, Jesus loves you. Okay. TTV says, what's up? Hello, TTV. Zach says, tell everyone to buy Joyride candy. No. OG says, hey, bro, read my chat on... No. Tommy says, ham. Okay. Bentley says, what? Catherine says, new setup. Yeah, new setup. Stephanie says, what is the funniest comment you got in today? I don't think I've laughed this stream. Meredith says, okay. Meg says, eat shit. No. Rowan says, did you know Goob? What does that mean? Griffin says 67. Okay. Nade says, hi. Hello, Nade. Marlon says racist. I'm not racist. Faith says also, Jesus loves you. Thank you. I don't believe in that, though. Elk super chats. I don't care about the timer. Just please touch grass after this to detox, bro. You're inhaling a dangerous amount of internet right now. Maybe. I don't know. I think this is more healthy than doom scrolling because I'm like reading. I'm not just staring at a screen. Anyways, I'll take a walk after. Penny says, God loves you, and I do too. Thank you. And Name says, do you goon? No comment. Mars says, hi. Hello, Mars. Golden says, let me touch you. No. CZ says, should I get dreads on my ball hairs? I don't think so. Someone says, I like oats. Okay. So does the first captain. Shauna says, do you like WWE? No. AT says, save manama, blah, 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 blah. No. Cotton says, you're so nonchalant. Okay. Mars says, do you like McDonald's? Yes. Mega says, it's enabling his cognitive abilities so it makes him smarter. I actually think that might be true. Slam says, should I name my daughter Beef Chungus? No. SH says, Mary Jane is not my lover. She's just a girl who forgot that I am the one. Okay. Comic says, show hole. I'm not that kind of streamer. Ellie says, remember to stay hydrated. Thank you. MN says, can you do a touching grass stream? No. DB says, is your ball sack saggy? I don't want to talk about that. Normal says, bye Don. Goodbye, Normal. The Hidden says, seals like McDonald's to... What are you saying? DX says, I wish you a great time. Thank you, you too. Jen says, miss me? Sorry, no. Isaac says, hi. Hello, Isaac. Peach says, you look gay. No offense. Okay. Gray says, Monoma Trama. Okay. God says, I jumped my dog and now I'm a dad, but I can't pay child. What is he saying? The first captain says, hey, that's supposed to be my line. Yeah, exactly. Eva says, hi, hello. I Eat Soup says, have you ever shaved your friend's balls? I haven't. Eli says, hi, I'm new. Hello, Eli. Unimportant says, what's your favorite restaurant? McDonald's. The Positive says anything. That works. Sadie says, do you know Stray Kids? I've heard about them. Tommy says, how is your day? Good. But right now my eye is irritated, so that's annoying. The Positive, I already read that. Aries says, you're so mean. Sorry. Eli says, I like trains. Okay. Maximus says, I farted. Okay. Eline says, why? Why what? Tommy says, sorry. I don't know what you're referring to. Broma says, what's your favorite game? Minecraft. DD says, I'm gooning to you. Enjoy yourself. Vinny says, racial slur. Alright. Crystal says, hi. Hello, Crystal. FT says, can I get a shout out for my mom? It's been 4 years. I'm sorry if she passed away. Woozy says, have you ever considered that everything is either is or is not a crab? No, I don't get that philosophical. Corbin says, okay. DD says, I'm gooning to you. Again, enjoy yourself. Jimmy says, tongue to her. Alright. Miss Hod says, happy birthday, Don. It's not my birthday. Tommy says, what is your favorite Minecraft skin? Salcy1's Minecraft skin is cool. Porma2 says, just realized I thought the timer looped because people paid ticks in the stream. What a stupid. Yeah, that is stupid. Trek says, have you ever played Fortnite? I have. Angry says, day 2 of asking how long your TV is. I'm not gonna figure that out. Uncle says, are you related to Charlie Kirk? I'm not. Adventuring says, I'm suing for blinding me with your shiny head. That's not gonna go down in court. Chases says, I'm goon to you. How's your day? It's going good. Felix says, what? What? Gray says, I want to die. I hope that changes. Stephanie says, what is your channel mainly about? It's only about this, reading chat messages. Bowie says, do you like Zelda, by the way? I haven't played the games. Pokemon says, who's your favorite Pokemon? Mewtwo. OX says, Beanut. Putter. Okay. Corbin says, read this. Adafitib. Okay. Cold Slayer says, do you believe in dog? What? I believe that dogs exist. RG says, I have a joke. Why can't Mexicans play Uno? Something. No comment. Jaco says, how big is your head? It's bigger than average. Sophie says, hello, how are you? I'm good. Cookie says, cause this is Thriller. Okay. Griffin says, I think you should go bald. I don't think so. Squilliam says, day 62 of asking Don how's life. Good. I felt uncanny earlier, but now I feel fine. Brandon says, hi, can you read my message? I read it. Jake says, shave that head. No. Elk says, is this your full-time job? It isn't. DD says, I've been gooning to you. Okay. God says, I meant hump. Okay. Zad says, do you speak English? Yes. B Stress says, you should grow a tiny mustache on your upper lip. I might do that in some years. Cookie says, hee hee. Okay. Dylan says, you're cool and funny. Thank you. Blue Gamer says, what's up? Hello, Blue Gamer. Get says, get sleep. It's okay if not. I'm not gonna do that. G Money says, Ronaldo or Messi. Petitive fruit. Unimportant says, favorite candy. Nerds gummy clusters. Steph says, why didn't the ass glacier get the hantavirus? I'm lost. Tor says, hello. Hi. Bowie says, if you read this, real member owes me canes. Alright. Corbin says, what the dog doing? I don't know. Cal says, poopy. Okay. Miner says, anything is a 50% chance because either it happens or doesn't. Alright. Blue Gamer says, warm, eat apple, apple explode warm. Alright. Witho says, background is dizzy. Yeah, but it's cool. Logic says, I'm new. Welcome. Kai says, 7U. What? Angela says, if you read this, I am thinking of dying. I really hope things get better then. Jake says, Spurs or Wolves? Spurs. 75 says, favorite artists? I like Radiohead. AB says, hi. Blake says English or Spanish. English. Porma2 says, I am mentally sound. Sane. Jonas says, if you had $1 million right now, what would be the first thing you'd buy? I would invest in Google and Take-Two Interactive. Damnation says Wolves or Wolverines. Wolves. Porma2 says, I don't believe you. Okay. Bowie says, I'm liking the stream because you're built different. Thank you. CL4 says, why don't you like Jesus? I like Jesus, I just don't believe in him. Wendy says, do you play Minecraft? Yeah, I was playing Hypixel a week ago. Billy says, hello, I'm sadly moving away, so please, what you moving away? That actually sounds cool. Salish says, read my message. Name my dark brown into light brown. What are you saying? Colby says, you like frogs? I do. D's Nuts says, big muffs. Alright. Get says, why are you so honest? Because isn't that a virtue? Sharky says, dude, type better. Get says, I already read that. JJ says, do you shave your wet ball sack when you get out of the shower? No comment. Says, sorry, my chat box is lagging because there's too many chat messages right now. I want to read your message. Page unresponsive. 1 second please as I deal with technical issues. Let me read and eat it like the inside of Dubai chocolate. I don't eat feces, that's not my thing. Says, do you know hantavirus can shrink your DNA? Yeah, I heard about that. Billy says, hello, you did not say rest in peace to my dog. Oh, your dog passed away, sorry, rest in peace. Rajet says, hi Benitez, hello Rajet. Someone says, do you watch Jujutsu Kaisen? I don't. Stephanie says, did you already read my message? I don't know, I might have. 9+ says, do you prefer iPhone 18 Pro Max or Samsung? I like iPhones. Braylo says, what are you looking at a screen with all the chats on it? I am doing that. Christian says, are you gay? No. Undead says, hello, can you be my friend? Sorry, I am not up for that. Lobster says, please answer me. I like Radiohead. Okay, you like Radiohead. Oliver says, have you watched Fundamental Paper Education? I haven't. Adventuring says, knock knock, who's there? Christian says, do you like turtles or dolphins? I prefer dolphins. Demonic says, I'm new, welcome. Keon says, lol, laughing emojis. Alright. Jaco says, rest in peace your hairline. My hairline isn't bad. Stephanie says, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Rainbow. Dulce says, I have cancer. Sorry. Keith says, what's up everybody? And going to bed. Have a great night. Good night. Miss says, what's your favorite anime? Spirited Away. Fig says, what's your time? Right now it's in the PM. Keon says, your hairline is great. Okay, good to hear. Billy says, thank you, good night, good night. Tommy says, you. Oh my god. Hunter says, 67, alright. Malice says, tell me why, what? Adventuring says, mop. Okay. Wingman says, I like your hair, thank you. Bowie says, Billy Bob is him. Okay. Saucy says, I like you. Thank you. Sarn says, Spirited Away is great. Got to see it in the theater. Yeah, me too. Jamie says, do you ever use your left hand when I pick up my water bottle? 0x says, open your soul to the peanut butter. I don't like peanut butter. Daisy says, hi. Hello, Daisy. Sharky says, how do you have you? Oh my god. Talia says, what's your favorite fruit? Orange. Max says, you seem like you don't lose arguments. Alright. Christian says, do you like dolphins or whales? Dolphins. Pokemon says, have you still trying to beat a demon in Geometry Dash? I gave up on that game. Billy says, do dumb people hurt your brain? No, somehow they don't. Jacer says, I hate my life. Sorry. Braylo says, are you getting tired of reading chats? Not yet. Crust says, do you ate the use? What? User says, Should I buy meme coin to get rich? No, invest in AI companies. Blake says, my stomach hurts. Sorry. Wingman says, what's your favorite mythical Pokemon? I don't even know what a mythical Pokemon is. Zero X says, open your soul to the jelly. No. Earth Monkey says, Jesus loves you. Alright. Surd says, do you play Brawl Stars? I did when it came out. CJ says, I like devouring dish liquid and glass cleaner. You shouldn't do that. Dashy says, do you know the way of a gag crab? I don't. Jason says, do you remember me? No. Your fave says, what's your favorite animal? Chimpanzees. Caitlin says, do you like Diddy? Not a fan. Happy says, how are you today, bro? I'm a little thirsty. Stephanie says, before I leave, will you do this tomorrow? I don't know. Felix says, do you know Stray Kids? If not, can you listen to them? I don't want to listen to them. Tommy says, chem. Okay. Wingman says, what's up, bro? I subbed. Hello, Wingman. Thuy says, should I go get a snack or what? You should. James says, Grundle. Alright. Smitty says, what is your favorite food? Cheeseburgers. History says, am I your favorite history buff? You are. Rebecca says, have you ever went to youth camp? Yes. Adventuring says, knock knock. Who's there? Mop. Mop who? Miss says, you said you're thirsty when there's water to the right of you. Yeah, it's weird. I know. Acid says, do you know the king of K-pop? Michael Jackson. Scooter says, please don't kill yourself if you're thinking about it. You look depressed. Oh, I'm thank you, but I'm not. Stoop says, is it chunky or slim or thin? I'm talking about your poop, by the way. No comment. Coke says, you know Joe Bart? I do, the In the Hills guy. Gabriel says, hey. Hello, Gabriel. Cruz says, Michael Jackson is pop, not K-pop. Yeah, I know that. Wendy says, want to play Minecraft or nah for a live stream? I don't. Jen says, how do you stay happy, go out on walks? Handsome says, you look tired. Are you tired? I am not tired. History says, I'm glad you're getting the viewers you deserve. Thank you. The first captain says, Stoop kid, weird comment, but I love the profile picture. Okay. Adventuring says, leffing my ass fucking off. Okay. Jen says, great advice. Thank you, Donito. You're welcome. Coke says, you should watch Joe's philosophy videos. I have, and I didn't like them. Owen says, hi, Roblox or Minecraft? Minecraft. Salos says, read my message. Name my horse girl. I don't know. Sarah. Bowie says something. I don't want to say that. Zero X says, you dare refuse such a mystic gift from the PB&J gods? I do deny. Liam says, Donito, Mr. Donnie. Okay. Mega says, can I ask PC questions? You can. Oreo says, Michael Jackson is better. Yeah, better than K-pop. Zacko says, laughing emoji. Okay. Cookie says, wait, I was spamming Michael Jackson the whole stream. You didn't notice. I noticed you. Louis says, guess who broke their arm? You. Sorry. John says, hi. Hello, John. WW says, what's your gender? Male. Kamikaze says, drink water. Remind me in 5 minutes. Big says, and I'm Big Bug. Okay. AC says, A, B, C, D, F, G. Alright. Java says, hee hee. People always told me, be careful what you don't go around breaking young girls' hearts. Okay. Sharky says, I have no friends and you have is no. Type better, please. Axel says, did Ramon donate today? He hasn't. Spooky says, what should I eat as a snack? Zebra cakes. Fish says, I want waffle fries. Me too. DB says, deh. Okay. Unimportant says, favorite game now? Minecraft. Jacko says, the fuck? What? 9+ says, Baghdad or Terrain? Terrain. Lukey says, Michael Jackson's better. Yeah. Adventuring says, how do you do how Dude, you're frying my brain. Coke says, why didn't you like Joe's videos? I guess I'm not a fan of rambly philosophy videos. I like structured video, like videos. Bot says, have you ever put your D in PB or J? I haven't. Cruz says, Michael Jackson sold out all of K-pop. Okay. Daniel says, do you floss? I do. Wingman says, what's your opinion on My Hero Academia? Not a fan. Bowie says, did Tyler Shoe get robbed of Oro? I don't know who Tyler Shoe is. Squiggle says, what is your favorite animal? Orangutans are up there. JJ says, starfish. Okay. John says, hi. Hello, John. Wingman says, dang it. Okay. J Blue says, I like your jacket. This isn't a jacket. Budzo says, been some time since I've last seen you. Good to see you consistent. Thank you. Oreo says, you can say your username. Parasocial Don Benitez. Cool Boy says, why are we talking about D? Because someone wanted to. History says, today in 1607, the Pilgrims landed and founded Jamestown. Wow. Mayno says, do you know what is Five Nights at Freddy's? Yeah. Daniel says hi. Hello, Daniel. Giovanni says hi. Hello, Giovanni. Unimportant says favorite letter. D. Wise says did. Alright. Liam says, come on, go rest. I don't need a rest. Genghis says, hello, Donathan. Hello, Genghis. Sharky says, can you help me and get me a Tippist? What are you talking about? Rylan says, what is the best chip flavor? I like Blue Ranch. Is that what it's called? Big Mac says, McDouble or Big Mac? Big Mac. Dylan says, I cried, never gonna hold the hand of another guy. Alright. Frank says, Down syndrome, Keanu Reeves. Alright. Unimportant says, favorite number, 24. Tuna says, I have a machete. Alright. Retirement says, read all please. Because you said that, I'm not gonna do that. Happy says, do you like men? Not romantically. Jen says, laughing my fucking ass off. Okay. Giovanni says, how are you? I'm great. Adventuring says, do you play with Mike Hawk? No comment. Luke says, hi. Hello, Luke. 823 says, Jimmy is not my favorite thing about this site. What are you saying? Dylan says, do you like Emmy? Haven't heard of them. Burn says, hello. Hello, Burn. Alonzo says, it's been 5 minutes. Drink your water. Got you. 1 second, please. Reese says, what's good? Hello, Reese. Just reading chat messages. Sweaty says, hi. Hello, Sweaty. Cal says, I am Duck. Say hello to Duck. Hello, Duck. Fecal says, do you know Nirvana? Yeah. I know they have an album called Fecal Matter. Corner says, who is your crush? No comment. History says also, today in 1807, Lewis and Clark embarked from St. Louis. Okay. Mike says, Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers. Alright. Waffle says, love the new background. Thank you. Hunter says, are you gay? Not gay. Bowie says, Jesus is king. Okay. OR says, go to touch grass. I will. Bo says, I like your shirt. Thank you. Heavenly says, Hidoi. What is that? John says, G. Okay. Unimportant says, favorite family member. I don't want to choose. Engineer says, 67. Okay. Happy says, I like men. Alright. Big says, change the background to black men kissing. That's not my style. Ink says, YOLO, Brotato. Hi. Moon says, LeBron or Larry Bird? Larry Bird. Daniel says, huh? What? Felix says, my tip just fell off. Sorry. Dylan says, my name is Ben Dover. Pokemon says, I just subscribed. Okay. Sky says, can you say happy birthday to my mom? Happy birthday, person's mom. Wesley says, Drake or Kendrick? Kendrick. Dom says, hi. Hello, Dom. Mana says, I got a friend named Mila. Alright. Icy says, have you heard of Attack on Titan? I've heard of it. Johan says, stay hydrated. Remind me in 20 minutes. 5:30 says, do you remember me? No, I don't. Big Mac says Garfield. Okay. Rylan says pancakes or waffles. Pancakes. Sasquatch says, I pooped myself today. Alright. John says, hi. Hello, John. Engineer says, my grandma has cancer. Sorry to hear that. Thank you again, Elk, for your super chat earlier. Age says, you're my favorite OnlyFans creator. You've got the wrong person. KO says, I like that you are dry and compelling at the same time. Thanks for the interesting description. Tommy says, can I get you a new headset? No. Dylan says 3.14159 is pi. Yeah. Spooky says supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Okay. Big Mac says Garfield. Okay. The cat. Okay. Ben says fast foods or homemade foods by mom. Fast foods. Sketchy says, can you say motherfucker for my friend? There you go. Josh says .I. Alright. Is that a penis? Bullseye says hi. Hello, Bullseye. Jackson says your dad's hot. Okay. Wesley says this dude hates his mom. I just like fast food. Fast food trumps everything. Porma2 says horrific take. Sorry. WYO says hey. Hello, W. Asher says, do you like wieners? No. Undead says, I don't have friends. Can you be mine? Sorry, no. Proc says, do you support Hitler? I don't, and I condemn your comment. Velk says, penis. Okay. Lily says, he. Okay. Sergio says, bro, the hair is getting long. Yeah, it is. The Scottish says, the background music was the daycare theme from FNAF. No, it wasn't. Demon says, cat or dog. Gabriella says, say neighbor. No. Undead says, please, can you be my friend? Sorry, no, but maybe someone else can. RM says, who'd win in a fight to the death? A Somalian pimp or 10 Kazakhstan spec ops operatives? The Kazakhstans. 80 says, boy, you chopped. Alright. Game Boy says, do you prefer a 12-inch or 6-inch? No comment. Sophie says 67. Alright. Someone says Agent Stonefish. This is someone. Over. Okay. Liz says, hello Don from Taiwan. How has your Thursday been treating? I'm not from Taiwan. Blinky says, do you have Riz? I don't think I do. Banana says, yo, love your stream. Thank you. Rebel says, hi, hello Rebel. John says, yo, sup John. Splack says 89. Okay. Cody says, do you like Cheez-Its? I do. Better than Goldfish. History says, favorite historical figure? If you answer Stonewall, I will give you a smooch. It is Stonewall. I don't want the smooch though. Ball says, how do messages get picked? Is it just random? It's basically random. Down says, who would win? 50, 30-year-olds or 30, 50-year-olds? The 30-year-olds. Oof says, can you perform Shake It Off? No. Dion says, what is your opinion on opinionless people? I understand them. T says, Cheez-Its are dank AF. Yeah. Sub T says, aw. Alright. Dylan says, you're not chopped at all. Alright, thank you. Gone says, damn Donnie blew up. Okay. Spooky says, someone respond to someone. Over. Alright. Velk says, how long have you been doing this? An hour and 13 minutes. Marco says, hey, do you remember me? I don't. Rome says, can I crack? You can't. Midnight says, Trump or Kamala. I don't get into politics. Danny says, hi. Hello, Danny. Liam says, hello. I is new, so I love Helldivers too. Okay. Reflex says, what do you think of thinking about thoughts? I think it's in futility. Gary says, he's trying to hypnotize us into gay submission with that background screen. That's not the idea. Pug says, hi, how are you? I'm great. Proc says, is it pink? No comment. Kick says, it's behind you. A TV's behind me. Daniel says, are you gay? Not into men. Tommy says, you have Riz. Okay. The first captain says, Man, chat is getting weird today. Yeah. Sophie says, can you smile? Say something funny. History says, going to my favorite battleground a month from now. It's Vicksburg, by the way. I want to visit Stonewall Jackson's house. Sharky says, okay. Cal says, why are you doing this? Money. John says, yeah, okay. Felix says, please read BTS or Stray Kids. I'm not into K-pop at all. 823 says, would you rather die or be dead? What's the point of that question? Comic says, with Stonewall Harry, I don't know. Yo P says, do you like WWE? I don't. Toe says, the Fitness Gram Pacer test is a multi-stage aerobic capacity test. Alright. Miles says, I miss you. Okay. Gary says, Stonewall Jackson would keep you as his pet. No, he wouldn't. Dirty says, are you scooping what I'm pooping? I'm not. Oof says, what's the most embarrassing thing Yvette done? Who's Yvette? Jackson says, Kanye or Taylor? Kanye. Big Mac says, Garfield. I get it, Garfield. I get it. Bullseye says, hi Don, you should drink water. Remind me in 10 minutes. RM says, have you ever been pimp slapped by a wet pom-pom? I haven't. Sarn says, I think you probably chill, bro. Thank you. IC says, Attack on Titan. Okay. Coco says, Garfield. Alright. It's Chewy says, get a job, not YouTube. Okay. Undead says, Tyrone's cracking me right now. Alright. Bowie says, for God so loved the world, he gave his one and only son. Alright. The Hidden says, bye, I hope you have a good life, sir. You too. Felix says, already read that. Lemon says, are you lesbian? I'm not. IC says, when are you gonna watch Attack on Titan? Never. Thank you again, Narcos, for your super chat earlier. Describe yourself in 3 words. I don't know. What's a word that defines me? Connie says, would you rather be honest or tell the truth? That's the same things. Call of Ducks says ducky. Okay. Nell says pickles are crunchy. Alright. Maddie says ha 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 ha. Alright. Cameron says BBL. Okay. Game says, I finally found a machine at the gym that I like. The vending machine. Same. The OB says, do you know a tornado killed 619 people? I didn't. Timmy says, grasses, Poke family are a diverse group of plants ranging from lawn grasses. Okay. K says, periwinkle purple. Alright. Bob says, shall I summon the Witherstorm in my Minecraft world? No, you shouldn't. Cameron says roar. I'm not Shrek. John says pop. Okay. Coco says, are you Sigma? I'm not. Connie says, would you rather pee or pie? 3.14. Steph says, how much ass could a wood ass? What are you saying? Demon says, I poop in Pringles. Alright. Monkey says, no, you should really take a drink. Wink wink. I don't get it. Raylia says, this like the whole Twitter match. Every question just smacks in your face. Okay. SKEL says, are you poopy pants? I am not. Ducky says, did you know the India tsunami killed 200,000 people? I didn't. Liz the Chick super chats, Don, I'm saying hi to you from Taiwan. I'm currently in Taiwan. Okay, cool. I don't know what happens there. I think they're known for technology, maybe. Danny says, what's your favorite animal? Chimpanzees. Elijah says 66. Okay. Chan says, do you love God and Jesus? Nope. Sakura says, I can't, says senpai. Why, you're so strong. Oh god. Derek says, it's only gay if you push back. Alright. MX says, I finna crack you. You don't have my permission. Gunner says, bro, I didn't get a chance to get a job. Sorry. K says, I feel bad for you with these comments. Sorry. I mean, I don't mind. Coldslayer says, 66 million years ago, on this day, we remember dinosaurs going extinct. What? That's not real. Not a real fact. EOP says, Would a monkey or a World War I soldier win? Soldier. Proto says, how do I drink water? It's instinctual. Colby says, yo, how's your day been, bro? Good. History says, I think if Patrick Cleburne had the resources of Stonewall, he could have surpassed him as the best field commander. I like to think Stonewall's the best. I'm biased for Stonewall. Comic says Cedar Point killed my dad. Sorry. Matt says hi. Hello, Matt. Sophie says, what is the formula for pi 3.14? Liz says, I came as a babysitter for my brother who is here to meet his clan members for a game. So basically to get laid. Okay. What game? Jen says, what's your favorite body part? Asking for a friend. My eyeballs. Maddie says, I'm twirling my bush right now. Okay. Connie says, LeBron or James. What? Elijah says, I hope you have a good day. You too. Reese says, can you tickle my pickle for a nickel? No deal. ADHD kid says hi. Hello. Pug says, Jordan or LeBron. God says, what did the casket say to the other casket? Is that you coffin? Okay. Frog says, I play with dinos on my private jet with a pool. What? Cammy says, everyone spam Garfield, or don't do that. Icy says, please watch Attack on Titan. No. PK says, hey, ass butt. Hello. Pug says, Jordan is better, but respect. To be honest, I don't know anything about basketball. I'm just choosing a random guy. Yo Peace says, I fell in the toilet. Please help me get out. I can't help with that. Liam says, how are you doing today? I'm doing good. Dylan says, you so CH. What? Sharko says, how do you feel about the amazing digital circus? I think it looks like it was made for children. Liz says, I have to ask him, I forgot. I'm currently you don't know the game even though you traveled to go there? Like you're... Aiden says, I'm so tired, are you? I am not tired. JR says, will you build a gaming store or a dance party? I'd rather do a gaming store. Jen says, Don plus Jen equals money, heart, water emoji. Ego says, are you religious? I'm not. It's Eden says, bro is fucking locked in when reading this. The fucking face expression says it all, bro. Okay. Dreamy says, go Broncos. Alright. Night Slayer says, you changed your profile photo, Donnie Boy. I change it every time I stream. God says, am I the first person to make you laugh? No, you're not. Timmy says, Joseph Jackson, often called the king of pop, was an American singer, dancer, songwriter. Alright. Dylan says, how should I ask my boy best friend out? I don't know. Maybe start with small talk. Liz says, it was a free trip to Taiwan. That's cool. It's Eden says, neighbor. We just gonna say fucking okay? Yes. Unless you ask me a question. Bella says, what's your favorite color? Gray. Kay says, do you know in the state of Georgia you cannot have an ice cream cone in your back pocket on a Sunday? That's not real. Zat says, pumpkin pie or apple pie? Pumpkin. RM says, for 400 years, that word has kept us down. Okay. Open says, imagine if Don plus Jen fuse into Ram. Are we so dead butt? Okay. Bowie says, that butt owes me canes, bro. Alright. MB says, salt and... no comment. Void says, do you love God? I don't. Camry says, do you play Roblox? No. Jen says, why not what? I'm sorry that I don't remember. Camry says, cheesy toes or grandma's fingernails? No comment. Crosswatcher says, I haven't been here in a month. You have a TV and is an atheist now? I always haven't believed in God. Comic says, my dad was shot trying to crack stone wall. Okay. Just Corgi says, Zapazoo Kudo? What? Sakuru says, by the way, somebody said Harry Hole, right? No comment. Connie says, pajamas the world, and also, what do you mean pajamas the world? Tommy says buffering emoji. Okay. Will says, what's your favorite song? Rabbit Hole by Arcade Fire. Timmy says, should I stop saying random information? No, go ahead. I like it. Jack says, I mixed Skittles and M&Ms and make S&Ms. Okay. Joanne says, what would you like to get out of life? I want to live in the moment. It's Eden says, do you have autism? I don't. Someone says, can I join your Discord server? Friend, the first captain 1 on Discord. Bengal says, what created? What? Helen says, hey, what's that in the background? It's a video of a fractal. Camry says, are you gay? I'm heterosexual. Dr. JB says, Dawn, the type to use the urinal next to you? No. Fresh says, what's your taste in music? Rock. Porma2 says, the first captain 1. Yeah, that's who you friend on Discord to get in the fan Discord. I'm not that active in it, but Johnny says, I just wanted for you to read my comment. Okay. Silly says, what is the most annoying thing in the world to you? I'm not a fan of burping. Bro says, hi, Mr. Burger. Hello. It's Eden says, y'all, can we stop asking him if he's religious or gay? It's just fucking rage bait. They're not gonna listen. Logan says, what's your favorite dinosaur? Velociraptor. Connie says, F-U-G-U-N, what? Bullseye says, hey Don, you should drink water now. I should. 1 second, please. The first captain says, yes, am here. It's the same as my YouTube user. Yeah. The Synth Wizard says, what do you think of the new profile picture? It's colorful, and I like how it matches your name. Skittle says, how was your day? Great. G-Dog says, have you watched JJK? I haven't. I'm not an anime guy. Creation says, what is your favorite game? I remember liking Zoo Tycoon back in the day. Nova says, what's your favorite food? Cheeseburgers. Godric says, how are you? I'm still thirsty. Bool says, I was here for your first stream. No, you weren't. Demon says, do you like guns and roses? I don't. Alfie says, I'm your 400th like. Okay. Just a Corgi says, don't pull up on the Zappa block. You might not get back. I don't even know where that is. M. Johnson says, do you hate your name? I don't hate it. Iced says, yo, are you gay or straight? Straight. Bingo says, ha 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 ha. No, you weren't. What? Jaden says, I have kids in my basement. Turn yourself into the police. The Synth Wizard says, do you know about the band Children of Bodom? I don't. Dan says, are you Pirate Software's long lost child? I would have longer hair. Dylan says, you like drag queens? Not especially. Like, I never got into that. Jet says, yo, I'm Sigma. Okay. Porma2 says, Children of Bottom fucks. Okay. Klex says, is it okay to eat your cat? No, it isn't. Grayson says, hi, is this your first live? It's not. It's Eden says, I feel so bad for you, bro. You're just talking to fucking mindless, brain-rotted kids. I mean, it's not that different from doom scrolling on, like, TikTok. Now it's just in text form. Dr. JB says, do you know what a stinky pinky is? No comment. Hogex says, my grandma did a backflip. Cool. JR says, you should breathe in, breathe out. I should. Porma2 says, are you gay? 67 tongues to her. Okay, brain rotted child. Luffy says, your style is boring, get a haircut. No. Pug says, who's your favorite artist? Nirvana's up there. Tommy says, what's your favorite band? As I said, they're up there. Camry says, I'm a furry. Okay. KK says, look it up. In the state of Georgia, you cannot have a ice cream cone in your back pocket. There's no way. Klex says, hi. Hello, Klex. Pug says, Nirvana's mine too. That's only one of mine. That's not the favorite. Dr. JB says, how long have you been bald? I'm not bald. Alfie says, Haven't seen you in a while. What's up? Hello, Alfie. Dr. Toenail says, my grandma fell up the stairs. Okay. Game Boy says, can I put your stink? What? Hit the snooze says, what's up, bro? Hello, Hit. The Lucky says, have you almost ever died? I've encountered a bear hiking. It wasn't a grizzly, though. Grayson says, what is your favorite music genre? Rock. Ace says, your hair is longer than I last saw. Yeah, that's how humans' bodies work. Coffee says, one shot. What? Tyler says, my grandpa fell down the stairs. What do I do? Help him. Hit the snooze says, thank you for reading my comment. You're welcome. Cairo says, do you play Roblox? No, I don't. I'm not a child. Coffee says, one shot is a game. Okay, haven't heard of it. Goblination says, your background hurts my brain. Sorry. It's Eden says, dude, I don't know if you saw the comment. Clearly you didn't, but someone just said, and I quote, what's the difference between a 3-year-old and a microwave? One gets mad when you... No comment. M. Johnson says, have you met a viewer? I haven't. Johnny says, I did die for what seemed like an eternity bathe. What? Zacho says, why are you ignoring life? The internet. Ivan says, do you like Satan? I don't. Ramon Martinez Benitez super chats. If you can't show the hog, can you at least show the outline? Please, please, please? No matter how many times you say please, I'm not gonna stand up and show my outline, my penis. That's, as I always say, that's obscene. Jaden says, W background, thank you. Jenna says, hi, would you rather die or stay immortal? Die. Dylan says, I love Nirvana. Do you think I'm cool? No. Jen says, hashtag Porma2 for president. Okay. Christy says, you should check out the band Raw. No, I shouldn't. Jeffrey says, are you Portuguese? Please race reveal. My ancestry is based in Mexico. Tan says, what is the name of the background? Look at the description. Dylan says, why do you not think I'm cool? Because liking Nirvana doesn't make you cool. Roblox says, I use Withcraft. What? Demon says, how do I crack LeBron with no protection? I don't know. Bengal says, yellow teeth brush gang. I do brush. Porma2 says, W band references. Okay. Frosty says, hi. Hello, Frosty. CJ says, can I crack? No, you can't. Dirty says, you make me happy. Okay. Miss Oreo says, where can I have some Oreos? I don't own any. Zayden says, yo. Hello, Zayden. Too Saucy says, bagels or English muffins? English muffins. Chase says, hi, daddy. Hello, Chase. King says, are you Muslim? Not Muslim. Uno says, do you love God? I don't believe in God. Plague says, what bands do you like other than Nirvana? I like Boards of Canada. The Synth Wizard says, have you ever had to end a stream early? I haven't. Hiem says, are you on something? No. Milk says 67. Okay. Yo P says, where does Darth Maul get his shoes that it's not it, Darth Vader? I quit the joke, man. Okay. Monkey says, I just crapped my pants. Alright. J Rula says, haircut. I'll do it eventually. Fan says, legalize hard drugs. Don't do that. Okay, Redline says, do you like cars? I don't. Tommy says, I'm going to bed. Good night. Caden says, God is real, bro. If God doesn't exist, we don't exist. I don't think that's right. Amber says, hello. Hello, Amber. Timu says, are you playing Roblox? I'm not. Frosty says, would you rather be a wizard or a dragon tamer? A dragon tamer. M. Johnson says, are you 21? No comment. Connie says, dash, dash, dash. Alright. King says, yo. Hello, King. Sketch says, W stream. Thank you. Jenna says, why would you rather die? Because being immortal sounds scary. Redline says, what do you think of my profile picture? I like it. A car drifting. That's cool. Doctor says, get a man bun. Not my style. That one says, best comic you ever read. I haven't read comics. I've been recommended Invincible, and I never got into it. Zat says, what is the best state in the US? I don't know. Tyler says, when my grandpa fell down the stairs, he sharded himself. Okay. King says, you believe in God or ghosts? Neither. 2 a.m. says, I cracked your mama last night. Okay. Jetlet says, bro, leave him alone with the God comment. I don't mind it. Someone says, wait, the first captain, I checked your channel out. You're pretty cool. Okay. Amen. Super chats. Would you shave your eyebrows if I sent you $1,000? I wouldn't. It would have to be $100,000. 9 says, are you depressed? I am not depressed. Socrates says, in Alabama, you can't have a ice cream cone in your back pocket. I really don't believe in that. Splake says, Don, what should I get it from McDonald's? Hurry. Big Mac, extra cheese. C. Brown says, biblical levels of greed there. When it comes to this, I have a high price when it comes to degrading myself. Sketch says, do you know FNAF? I do. Jet says, I watched Michael Jackson's funeral live, and his last words were he. Okay. Unknown says, do you like femboys? Not in particular. The Synth Wizard says, dog, not a soul is super chatting 100,000 bucks. I know. George says, are you hyped for the new Boards of Canada album? That's coming out. I didn't know that was a thing. Me says, are you high? No. H says, I'm drunk right now. Come drink with me. No, thank you. Mr. Toenail says, I choked on my watermelon, then I asked my grandma for 5 seconds of her time, and okay. Chase says, Latinas or snow bunnies? Who would you crack? No preference. M. Johnson says, you say no comment, but that itself is a comment. I guess that's true. Kevin says, hi. Hello, Kevin. Jenna says, would you rather have a notebook and be able to bring any alive but not... Alright, I think you need to type that better. Pug says, do you like Michael Jackson? I do. Waylon says, do you think Jesus is the savior? I don't, but the Sermon on the Mount is cool. Void says, hi. Hello, Void. Roblox says, I use witchcraft, bro. Can I have your hair? If you paid me. MC says, I passed out and woke up with a heat stroke. Sorry. Frosty says, who's your favorite artist? C418 is good. Tand says, can you change the background? I like it, though. The first captain says, why then you, someone? I find the content cringe, though. What? Spino says, do you play Roblox? I don't. One Goat says, if you could have one superpower, what would it be? To read minds. Socrates says, purpose. The law likely originating in the 19th or 20th century was allegedly intended to prevent horse theft. I know for sure that it's not enforced nowadays. The first captain says, why, thank you. I'm lost. Diz says, goon time. Okay. Thunder says, hi bro. Hello, Thunder. King says, why is people asking about Roblox FNAF? Because they have poor taste. Pormatu says, if you read my mind, you would start bleeding out of your ears. Do you watch gore often? Me says, I once threw a chair in my class, cause why not, and got suspended. Okay. Pibble says, hi bro. Hello, Pibble. E-Bike says, I'm getting raped. Sorry, call the police if that's true. Amen super chats. Parrot, if I send you 500, will you end stream? That's tempting, but no, because I have promised that I will stream until the timer ends, so I want to make do on my promise. The first captain says, someone said they liked my channel content, and I'm saying, thanks, but I think it's cringe. Oh, you have a low opinion of your own stuff. Juju says, if you read my mind, you would think I'm gay. Okay. Official says, Drake or Kendrick? Kendrick. Beast says, Coldslayer x Beast edits collab. Will it happen? Official says, I fucked a gorilla and 1v1'd it. No comment. Kalug says, unemployed final boss. Alright. Amen super chats. $1,000. Funny. TM says happy birthday. It's not my birthday. Sploid says goon on stream. No. There's other sites for that. Cemetery says, if you think Roblox is poor taste, then what do you play? I play Minecraft. Operator says, opinion on my mom's pizza. No opinion. Penaltied says, what's up, bro? Hello, Penaltied. Jake says, sing a song. I'm not a singer. Nature says, neighbor. Alright. Sketch says, which FNAF animatronic do you know? I know Freddy. Coldslayer says, what's FNAF? A horror game. Serial says, do you play Geometry Dash? I don't. Ava says, do you play other games? I've played Red Dead Redemption 2. Carla says hi. Hello, Carla. The Synth Wizard says, you barely acknowledge the super chats anymore, gang. Why, oh why? Because it seems like the right thing to do. Like, back in the day, I would like linger and like talk about the super chat a lot, but I feel like it might have been disingenuous. Willie says hi. Hello, Willie. Golden says hi. I love what? Miranda says, you should listen to Chick Chick Boom by Stray Kids. No, I shouldn't. Thort says, waffles or pancakes? Pancakes. M. Johnson says, just a tip. Nothing. Daly says, what's your type? Female. Juju says, have I been missing streams? I've been offline a lot. I was doing spring cleaning, getting rid of stuff. I'll tell you this, I've streamed like 4 times in total this month of May. Jocelyn says, yes sir, pancakes is better, yeah. Arthur says, Red Dead Redemption 2. Alright. Amen super chats, play Minecraft Hunger Games. If you win, equals $750. No. I mean, that sounds kind of boring, and I don't trust you anyways. Ryan says, struggle to read, eh? Yeah. Arthur, already read that. Mr. Americo says, yo, hi. You're Alone says, what are your favorite chips? I mean, potato chips are cool. Carla says, do you game? Yeah, I do. That's my man says, how big is it? My penis, that's private. Cat says 6666777. Okay. Mr. Bag says, whatever I say is true. By the way, if you read my username, you are gay. Whatever you say isn't true. H says, I love Red Dead Redemption 2 a lot. I'm subbing now, boy. Okay. I mean, that's not a good reason to sub. Lauren says, it's my birthday. Happy birthday. Chewing says, currently blowing a turd out of my motherfucker poo maker right now. Alright. Chris says, root beer. Okay. Sandro says, hello. Hello, Sandro. Chase says, I can smell you. You shouldn't. I have deodorant. Liz says, my brother plays Magic the Gathering. Okay. That game. Joe G super chats. Wow. Look at the new set. Nice, Don. Don's least favorite questions are, do you remember me? Can you rate my profile picture? I don't like those questions. Operator says, opinion on biking. It's fun. Carla says, what games do you play? I play Minecraft and Rainbow Six Siege. King Bob says, are you gay or Muslim? I am neither. Diane says, A&W or Barks. They both taste the same to me. Lauren says, thank you so much. You're welcome. Mosquito says hi. Hello, Mosquito. By the way, Joe OG, thank you for complimenting my set. I like it as well. Rebenza says, do you have kids in your basement? I don't. Beast says, Don looks like he's traveling into another universe. Yeah, it's kind of like Space Odyssey. Thort says, what is your main operator on Rainbow Six Siege? Blitz and Clash. Jacob says hi. Hello, Jacob. Zip says, any thoughts on Girls' last tour? Haven't heard of them. Mick Aiden says, I play Roblox FPS games. Is that poor taste? Yes. Mason says hello. Hello, Mason. Gojo says, you are amazing. Thank you. Fletcher says, do you perhaps like Wingstop? I've been there once and I disliked it. Mr. Bag says, found you on the hub last night. Wasn't me. Roblox says, can you say pussy? There you go. Xavier says, rate my profile picture. Gorilla Tag, 1. Jason says, creamy. or crunchy when it comes to what? Slime says, I want waffle fries. Me too. Geller says W. Thank you. I like your profile picture. Socrates says emoji. Okay. Sketch says, bro, I love your stream. Thank you. 2Rel says, bro, what? Juju says, you even changed your profile picture. Yeah, I did. I'm changing it every day I stream. Socrates, I already read that. Almighty says, do you play Dead by Daylight? Never have. GD says, what do you think about the new virus called the hantavirus? I don't think it's anything to worry about. C says, my drunk hamster ate off my eyebrows. Okay. History says, if you could meet one chatter IRL, who would it be? Stay away from Ramon. I mean, Ramon would be a candidate, actually. Potato says, say hello, but don't say my name. Too bad. Mel says, do you change your profile every stream? That's what I said. Juju says, do you think I should change mine? I kind of like yours. The face, like hand on face. But do what you want. M. Johnson says, do you remember the person above me? Juju. Doug says, hi. Hello, Doug. Vanity says, Jack in the Box or McDonald's? McDonald's. Pug says, did you know Bruno Mars isn't from Mars? Of course. George says, what's the most recent movie you've seen? City of God. Felix says, can you say my name? It's Felix. I did. Susie says, Resident Evil. Did you play it already? No, I'm not interested. Jenna says, would you rather have a notebook and be able to bring any alive but not be able to control them, or have a not bringing back dead people would be cool? Juju says, yeah, Juju is well known around these parts. Yeah. Redline says, I took the photo in my profile picture. That's awesome. Jackson says, fuck. Okay. Chase says, I have 5-degree burns on my dick. Sorry. Cold Slayer says, did you know Don Benitez isn't from Benitez? I'm lost. The Birdman says cats or dogs. Dogs. King Bob says, where are you from? America. RX says, you should low-key put on a maid out costume. I high-key shouldn't. Levi says, hi. Hello. Joe G says, 2 nuns were sitting on a park bench when a man in a trench coat comes up and flashes them. The first nun had a stroke. The second nun tried, but she couldn't reach. I don't get it. Sad Boy says, would you rather be hard for the rest of life or soft? I don't want to think about that. King says, I am the king. You are. Someone says, Vanity and Dragon Knight have Zai Butcher vanity profile pictures, whatever that means. Sai says, I see you're growing your hair out. Nice, thank you. That Brownie says, is there a reason you do these streams or just for fun? Partly for fun. Cold Slayer says, I'm cold. You are. Roblox says, 3 something something is a body there. No comment. Redline says, is the photo good because I want to be a photographer when I'm older? I mean, it looks solid to me. Cloud says, that's the... What? Miranda says, bro, are you gay? I'm not gay, bro. Someone says, YZ is pronounced Yishi because it's Chinese. Okay. Catching says, hi guys, hello. Sketch says, what's your favorite fast food? In and out. NY says, what's your number? JK. Didn't understand in the first place. Susie says, do you mog? I don't know. TCL says, any thoughts on the Blue Archive? What's that? Caddy says, does the background ever make you dizzy? It doesn't. Thuy says, do you like the name Thuy, or do you have a better nickname? Thui's good. Carter says, how was your day? Good. Abu says, when you said, oh, that game about Magic the Gathering, what is that game? I don't know what that is. I know it's a card game, and that's pretty much it. Forever says, please give me a shout out, dog. No. Vision says, do you know the Walking Dead game? Telltale, the girl that dies? Yeah. Sketch says, Messi or Ronaldo? Petitive fruit. Eli says, how long is my penis? That's private. The founder says, what is your favorite game of all time? Minecraft. Juju says, has shapeshifting been around? been around? Unfortunately not. Cold Slayer says background is triggering a toothache. How is that possible? And Y says, what's your number? I don't understand. Keegan says Minecraft or Roblox. Minecraft. Stock says, your basement is actually starting to grow on me, Don. I don't mind you not checking on me or feeding me anymore. You're in someone else's basement. Icy says drink water. Remind me in 5 minutes. 2rel says chicken 55. Okay. Gold says hello my neighbor. Hello Gold. Mort says I will touch King Julian's feet one day. Okay. OS says it's in Germany 5:43. Alright. Loaf says you should start using the nerd voice more often. Remember, I should. Anu says, what's a better career, a biologist or a doctor? Biologist. Jordan says GG's. Okay. Frostify says, is the background an illusion video? It's a fractal video. T5 says, are you using your mouse with your left hand? I'm using my right hand. Joe G says, cremation. My last hope of having a smoking hot body. Okay. AI says, what's up, mother? Father? Motherfucker? What? Xeon says W. Okay. Green says, is it large, daddy? No comment. Kunal says, what's with the new setup, Don? The older, simpler one was better. I disagree. When it's a blank background, it makes things more intimate. Like, I feel like I'm doing... I like having a busy background. Clip says, do you wipe with sandpaper? I don't. Kat says, any thoughts on the Backrooms movie trailer? I'm not going to watch the trailer, but I will watch the movie. AJ says, hantavirus is not new. Look up Navajo flu in 1970. Okay. Waz says, how have you been, Teflon? Don, I've been good. Smoove says, hi. Hello, Smoove. Johnny says, I wipe with sandpaper. Sorry, the Quran. What? Rock says, do you know Asperger's syndrome? I've heard about it. TCL says, Blue Archive is a gotcha game. I'm not into gotcha games. Thomas says, if I quit being a quitter, does that mean I'm still a quitter? I guess. Zigzag says hello. Hi. Kaysen says, I'm going to be riding bulls, cowboys up. Alright. Almighty says, do you prefer gaming or arcades? I've been to arcade. They're cool, but gaming's better. Isabel says, what's the nerd voice? I'll do it soon. Socrates says, what do you do? What them to your body when you die? Buried. Tiger says, I want to be a good person, but mama always told me be myself. Okay. Big Flex Mafia super chats. If two witches were watching two watches, which witch would watch which watch? I don't know. I don't think it matters which witch. Sketch says, what will make you happy? Touching grass. Jet says keep. What? Byler says, are you high? I'm not high. Destructor says, what is your favorite sport? I like basketball. Joe G says, a dyslexic man walks into a bra. Hydration time. Okay. Can you remind me in 5? Mojang says, do you have Discord? I do. Avion says, GJ. Alright. Kunal says, the older vibe was more bleak, which was better. I get that. Yeah. AI says, I'm gays. Okay. Perry says, hi. Hello, Perry. Abby says, do you support Therians, furries? Not really. Redline says, do you have a dream car? No. Cars are boring. Mr. Edit says, what's your favorite soccer team? The one with Ronaldo. If two witches were one, does it matter which witch? I think you could just choose randomly. Do you have an answer? Muhammad says, are you low? No. Turbo says, yes or no. When it comes to what? Forma2 says, you used to be open to people calling you on Discord. Did anyone ever take? Yeah. Slow says, going to school far from home. Any advice? Stay away from strangers. Or, I don't know. Are you in college? The King says, how happy are you? I am good. I love cookies says yellow. Alright. Susie says, do you know BP? I don't. Turel says, I'm a Mahu. Alright. First says, D. Okay. Muhammad says, are you Loey? Thought this was fake. What are you saying? Will says, yes or no. It's for something Dude, what are you typing? Like, I'll just choose yes. Max says, let me out of your room. You're not in my room. Kia says, have you ever watched Outer Banks? I haven't. Mick Aiden says, I play Minecraft Hypixel. Is that bad taste? No. Froggy says, I gooned. Okay. Zach says, this is a cool live stream concept, and you seem cool. Thank you. Sketch says, bye. I'm subscribing. See you later. RX says, smelling is just breathing and thinking about it more. Yeah. Jamie says, I poop too much. Alright. The first captain says, the TV may low-key be my fault. I sent him a picture of that dirty yellow room with the Hatsune Miku poster saying it looked like this. It wasn't your fault. Julian says, you earned a new sub. Okay. Turbo says, what's the meaning of life? I think it's to survive and reproduce. By the way, the first captain, I do like your idea of learning the pronunciation of Monoma trimascoposis. You know what I mean. Surpass says, so chill. Well, thank you. Loaf says, you know, you have a good comment when Don grins. Yeah. Liz the chick super chats, okay, I'm off. Have a nice rest of your day. See ya, Liz. Thank you for the money. Julian says, do you like anime? Not really. Fans says, McMuffin. I enjoy those. Coolness says, do you like pickles? I enjoy those too. Cold Slayer says, would you ever eat magic mushroom? No. I'm not into psychedelics despite the background. Bacon says, DPM journey better. What? Johnny says, the meaning of life is procreation and worshiping God. Being fruitful and multiplying? Okay. Midnight says, bros too nonchalant, feels like AI. Alright. Merlarky says, dirty dumpster raccoons escape. Alright. John says, shout me put. There you are on the screen. Kira says W. Okay. Redline says, name a car for an edit. Toyota Corolla 2005. Turel says, I like Mahu Bota. Alright. Kai says, neighbor. Alright. Katie says, W. Thank you. The first captain says, wowzers, that learning the pronunciation idea was a long time ago. Yeah, I have the idea saved in my notes. Big Flex Mafia super chats. I wish to wish the wish you wish to wish. Okay, I don't get that one, but I understood the which one, but that one's confusing. AI says I'm gay. Alright. Lucy says, who's your favorite person, Mr. Beast or Epstein? Mr. Beast. Joe G says, well, super chats. Remember when you were a kid and you used to blow bubbles? Well, I saw him downtown. He says hi. Oh god. Time to hydrate. Yeah, it is time. That's quite a dark joke. Zigzag says, Timmy Tough Knuckles. Alright. Gru says, do you know that bananas are radioactive? I didn't. Pug says, drink water. Okay, I'll do that. 1 second, please. Yo-Yo says, how has your day been, sire? It's been solid. AJ says, I guess I have worn out my welcome. No, you haven't. Merlarky says, look at him drinking water. Okay. Sport says, pineapple on pizza? Yes. Coolness says, you answer to every live comment? That's impossible. Cold Slayer says, has anyone ever make you laugh on here? Yeah. Kunal says, remove your headphones and show us your hair. I don't feel like it. Sable says, read me out if you're gay. Not how it works. AI says, I'm goonin'. Okay. Crowd says, blackjack or Texas Hold'em. Blackjack. AJ, I already read that. Jimothy says, why can't Jesus play hockey? 'Cause he always gets nailed into the boards. Okay. Killer says, this is so cool. I'm surprised there's finally a real live stream. Yeah, those give me a laughing disco and I'll give you Robux are Those streams are annoying. Muhammad says, I thought this was fake. It's real. I'm not one of those scammers. Joe G says, would you rather be called sire by lord or master? Master. Ramon says, if you were my stepson, I would tuck you into bed every night and wish you sweet dreams. Okay. JR says, are you still in school time or no? What does that mean? N says, how are you today? My body feels a little off right now. Charles says, pet me or no? No. Total says, I created hashtag stop cookie. Okay. Jimothy says, what is your favorite NHL team? I couldn't name you one. Jaco says, do you have a favorite band? Radiohead is cool. Goretti says, are your comments guaranteed 6-year-olds? No. Peep says, favorite Overwatch hero? I mained McCree. Star says, what's your favorite MLB team? I'm not into sports. RX says, does a straw have one hole or two holes? One hole. Ezekiel says, hi, hello. Beanie says, Crocs with socks or not? With socks. Star says, I thought this live stream is fake, not pre-recorded. Banana says, dance M is phenomenal. Okay. Project says, hi, hello Project. Tristan says, how do I come out that I'm bi? I don't know. You should just do it. Muhammad says, wow, thank you for being real. You're welcome. Demon says, do you want to oil up? I don't. Jack says, well done on the progress you've made. I remember when you first started. Thank you. Jordan says, hi. Sup, Jordan? Mr. Hoy says, are you okay? I am. Void says, you like pancakes? I do. Cold Slayer says, what was so funny when you laughed on here? I remember laughing at one of Joe G's jokes. I don't remember which joke. Jimothy says, go Habs go. Okay. Triad says, please day. Bill. What? AI says, dicky balls, gay balls. Alright. Cole says, no alarms and no surprises. Radiohead. Junia says, I'm going to get my exam results. Wish me luck. Good luck, Junia. Will says, everyone in this chat is now reminded to breathe manually and blink manually. Okay. Fig says, why? Okay. Void says, you like pizza? I do. Total says, job application or read all comments. I don't know. Earth says, hello, do you like Pluto, the dwarf planet? I don't. Hello says, this is fake. It's real. Lalo says, I think I'm high now. Okay. Husky says, what's your favorite nuclear reactor bomb? I don't have a favorite. Peep says, favorite video game? Rainbow Six Siege. Cam says, how do you get rid of the flies in my house? I think there's devices for that, like, I forget what they're called. NY says, what would you do if I donated $500? I would say thank you and move on. Killer says, do you want me to make an edit? Sure. Lalo says, what's your type of microwave? I don't know. Fan says, any heavy bands you're into? I haven't explored that stuff. Chief says, I like your background. Thank you. Mr. Edit says, is Messi Cristiano Ronaldo the GOAT? I choose Petitive Fruit. Bolshevik says, I'm throbbing. Alright. Mr. Boy says, is the people that are commenting believe that the earth is flat? Maybe some. JR says, can you teach me how to play Minecraft? Go ask someone else. Project says, hydrate bro. Later. Isaiah says, how do you ever thought something to? What are you saying? Ada says, hi, I love your background. I like it too. Cold Slayer says, why is Wheezing laugh so funny? I don't know. Bailey says, gain money or racial slurs. What? Zoe says, Sokka or AMG? I don't know what that is. Rice says, what do you think of Vocaloid? I think it sounds silly. Outdoor says, hey Sugar Plum, give me that number. No. John says, can you put your whole arm in my ass, daddy? I don't want to. Clip says, would you rather goon in public or fart? No comment. Hello says, you or me? Me. Annoyed says, at Parasocial, it's Astro. It's an Astro Explorer. What? Nix says, you just missed out on $500. L reaction. I am proud to not be a sellout. Thomas says, is there life after death? That's nobody knows. RX says, the youngest picture of you is also the oldest picture of you. Think about that. Okay. Joji says, you laughed at cremation. My last hope of having a smoking hot body. Yeah, that's what I laughed at. The first captain says, I condemn Don's comment. Vocaloid is not silly. It's cool. Maybe it is. I have to give it a real try. Jaden says, do you play 2 weeks? What's 2 weeks? Hello says, why you? Because I am self-absorbed like everyone else. Sable says, why you always say I don't know? Because I don't know. Chase says, if I am me and you are you, what does that make James? Clips says, would you rather be pregnant or illegal? I can't get well, I mean, I don't know, that's such a weird question. Ramon super chats, bro, how many loose, one-eyed, Mexican, brown snakes could you carry at one time? Is that slang for penises? I don't want to think about that because that's a very weird thing to think about. Black says, what is that screen behind you, gang? A fractal. Robin says, hi, I'm lesbian. Do you support? I do. Jackson says, would you rather rape someone or be the one being raped? No comment. We are all the existence has super chats. Why did you say everyone is self-absorbed? Because everyone is sinful, and I don't know. Kid says, joke, what has 2 rings and an arrow? Answer, a Chinese telephone. No comment. Hello says, what is super calibration? I don't know what that is. I thought says, do you like Radiohead? I do. Aviation says, what is this stream about? It's about me reading chat messages. TTV, Sharky, super chats, are you Charlie Kirk? I am not. Shaquille says hi. Hello. Clip says, would you rather live in North Korea or the slums? The slums. Ella says, what about me? What about you? Mr. Diddy says, say snicker without the S. Definitely not. A12 says, Epstein, you're in the files, you're cooked, not in the files. Ramon says, why would sins matter to a non-religious person? I don't believe in sins. I'm just using it as a tool to explain what I want to say. Zoe says, Sokka or Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender? Aang. Gur says, value. What? Kid says, is water wet? Yes. Fan says, favorite movie genre? Drama. Gru says, your dream job? Making videos. Empire says, how can I stop my gambling addiction? Maybe confess you have it to your friends, and maybe that'll help you stop it. JR says, what is the best restaurant, McDonald's or Burger King? McDonald's. Random says, is water wet or are we wet to water? Water's just wet. Irish says, do you like Mad Men? Haven't watched it. Big Flex Mafia super chats. 5 frantic frogs fled from 50 fierce fishes. Okay. The frogs were scared of the fishes. Ilya says, what you think about the Iran war? I don't have an opinion, but you can tell me yours. Bub says, what's vice today? Maybe virtue tomorrow. Yeah. Mr. Diddy says, $5 million or die. Dollars. Emily says, I have a horse. Okay. MB says, salt and no comment. Jaden says, you gotta like and sub. Thank you. Random says, how do you not have a sore throat? Yeah, it kind of feels bad right now. I should drink more water. Star says, is grass green? Yes. Gur says, I hope you can smell my cheesy outer layers. Okay. Pro Dude says, can you see air? I can't. Connor says, I love your channel, by the way. Thank you. Desire says, Jesus is the way. Alright. Sky Blue says, any thoughts on FL Studio Mobile? I don't make music. Joe G says, you do quote scripture often enough for an atheist. Drink H2O. I'll do that. 1 second, please. Mr. Hoy says, is there a petition to be gay? I don't think there is. Carlo says, how do you not give reactions? Desensitization. Faraz says, oi, you're my favorite YouTuber. Thank you. Kara says, can you please create ASMR? Definitely not. Official says 67 NPC comment. Alright. Soda says, I don't know. That's me. Ilya says, should I join the Air Force? You shouldn't. Someone says, yes, Vocaloid is cool. I agree with the first captain. You're a first captain fan, aren't you? Joe G says, a dyslexic man walks into a bra. Lol. Hydration. Yeah, that joke was good. Ella says, hey guys, it's one Del Dingle. Okay. Ronnie says, W streamer, keep on going. Thank you. Emily says, grass can be green. Okay. Elijah says, are we NPCs? Most of you. Juan says, dissolve me, Zaddy. No. Fat Man says, what would you do for a Klondike bar? Not shoplift it. Okay says, do you like Freddie Gibbs? Who's that? Socrates says, if you had to choose one food and drink, and you can only choose one food, I would choose In-N-Out cheeseburger and Coke. Actually, water. Rib says, I gave my pet fish a bath today. Alright. The Saint Blaine says, it's almost the weekend. True. Editor says, hi. Hello. Aleph says, why you always say okay? Because if someone makes a statement and I have nothing to say, I just say okay. C16 says, you could only eat burgers and fries every day for the rest of your life, but you gained 800 pounds. I don't think so. Chase says, do bald people have 4 heads? No comment. Well, never mind. John says, can you put your whole arm in my ass, daddy? I don't want to do that. Mr. GG says, watch Edmund. No. He says, watch JoJo Bizarre Adventure. I want a steel ball. I don't like anime that much. Tay says, fun fact. What? Clip says, Epstein or Diddy? Not choosing. The first captain says, wow, I have a fan. Okay, yeah. Sky says, any opinion about Pixel Gun 3D? I remember playing the campaign mode and being in a school and having to kill dead zombie children. Quite dark. Deanne says, play Roblox. No, but maybe Pixel Gun. Cracked says, I subbed. Okay. Hannah says, I'm a bi femboy Therian. You have all my support. Thank you. Clip says, do you wipe with fingers? Yes. No comment. Random says, you do mountain biking. I don't. Tay says, did you know that I eat spiders? Now I do. George says, sativa or indica? I don't have a preference. The Rise says, eat a green apple. No. Empire says, what is the longest word you know? Brilliant. Reg says, RCB. Okay. Lyndon says, glad to be on your channel. You're a brilliant YouTuber. Thank you. Allstraw says, coyote urine or end stream? End stream. Dynamite says, would you rather say okay or okay? I do 2 letters. Giggle says, black or white? What? Someone says, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Okay. Random says, YouTuber. That's me. Socrates says, I love content. Okay. 616s, I already read that. Joe G says, if you could go back to any time or event, what would it be? I would witness Jesus. Logi says gray or black? Gray. AI says, would you rather have a gay son or an OF model daughter? I don't like that question. Thally says, would you consider yourself atheist? I don't know. I think agnostic. Not my real name says, what's the most overrated band / artist? Taylor Swift. Seta says, I main Flores and Rainbow Six Siege. I remember I would main him because it was easy to team kill people with that guy. Emily says, I took my fridge on a walk, but now it's not moving. Okay. Jack says, English or Spanish? English. Mr. Hoy says, do you think all of us are clones of young Sheldon? No. Reg says, I like wah. What? Sagma says, do you play Brawl Stars? I'm not a child, so no. Kim Jong-un says, sup G. Hello. Tay says, what's your pet peeve? People passing gas. Noah says, is your fridge running? Better go catch it. Okay. XX says toilet. Alright. Mama says hi. Hello. Sagma says, what games do you play then? I play Minecraft. I'm kind of working on a server right now. Bluey says, do you know what to do if you shit too hard? No. Leo says hi. Hello. Venetia says toilet. Okay. Drone says, opinions on streaming Geometry Dash. I think that's a boring game to stream. It's only fun to play, not stream. To watch, I mean. Noah says, are you a Jew? No. Mason says, you asshole. Okay. Funky says, OOG. Alright. Maga says hi. Hello, Maga. Fad says, what's your favorite game? If I had to choose one, Minecraft. Mr. Nullified says, I lost the game. Sorry. AI says, you turned me on, big boy. Alright. The brother says hi. Hello. LL says, how do I clean the cum off my screen with a paper towel? Alex says hi. Hello, Alex. Clip says, what dry or dry fart? No comment. Apocalypse says, what's your best roast? I don't know, but feel free to roast me. Are you good at roasting? Copra says, do you still want to glue my butt cheeks together? Not like that Breakfast Club guy. Lyndon says, Don, where would you like to visit if money was no object? Peru. AH says hi. Hello. Ayoung says, move if you're gay. I guess I'm gay. Clip says, I already read that. Jack says, whoever moves first is gay. That's kind of a lame trend, I think. Ramon says, who's your favorite chatterbait performer? I don't have one. Joe OG super chats, Prince was a underappreciated guitar player. Alright. I haven't listened to his stuff. Maybe I should do that. Vortex says, are you gay? I'm not gay. Marvin says, what is your favorite scary movie? I like The Ring. Star says, you shit all over my walls. Okay. Miles says, hey, I had a long day and just wanted to say hi. Hello, Miles. I hope your day gets better. Perry says, hi, I'm subbed. I love your videos. Thank you. Reagan says, are you a potato? I'm not. Wolfie says, how you get that background? By putting it on the TV. Ayoung says, so you're gay? According to the people in the chat, Cole says, black text on white background. That's correct. Kid says, joke. What do you call a person with no body or nose? Nobody knows. That's good. The best says, Geometry Dash is like really good. No, it isn't. Porma2 says, gay by popular demand. Okay. Peanut says, I like cheese. Okay. Funky says, would you go back in time and be a caveman or stay normal? Stay normal. Colton super chats, are you Jeffrey Epstein? Obviously not. He's dead, and I don't look like Jeffrey Epstein. Total says, do you get tired of this? Sometimes. ST says, you make me need to shit. Alright. V4 says, Geometry Dash is decent. It's literally just clicking. Yeah. The first captain says, I'm definitely turning this into a video. What does that mean? Are you going to make shorts of this? Blake says he's not dead. He is dead. Lucas says, are you reading super chats? Yeah, I am. Did I miss one? Noah says, Geometry Dash, okay, Dobby boy. What? Nick says, pad kid poured, curd pulled, cod pad. Alright. Ramon Martinez Benitez super chats. If your dad needed help robbing a bank to save an orphanage, would you help or call the police? I mean, I don't know. I'm a pretty goody two-shoes of a person, so I mean, I really don't like committing crimes, so I don't know. Mama says, do you like Forsaken? I don't. Washer says lawnmower oil. Okay. Dom says, how are these creators using a strawberry filter and getting 1 million comments? I don't know what a strawberry filter is. Zach says, do you have OCD? I don't. Nessa says, if you had one wish, what would it be? I'm subbed. It would be to have a Minecraft server up and running. Noah says, Android trash, iPhone trash. Okay. Edit says, hi. Hello, Edit. Isaac says, do you know how to type? I do. Joseph says, there's Overwatch weapons on Fortnite. Yeah, and apparently Tracer is in Fortnite. Sab says, can you stand up? If I wanted to. Dane says, my iPhone charge Android better. Okay. Maria says, hi. Hello, Maria. Freak says, 1 × 1 = 2. Alright. V4 says, have you ever licked your toes? I haven't. Someone says, you know me. As in, if you think you don't, you just haven't realized yet. I'm lost. SK says, AG, shout out please. No. Joseph says, water looking a little full. It is. I should drink it soon. Kang says, brutally cunning or cunningly brutal? The former, because the former seems less violent. 24/7 says, clean. Alright. Ashley Yoda super chats, loving your long hair and great show as always. Thank you for the compliments. I appreciate it. Antoine says poo. Okay. Gamer says, can you please? What? Vint says, how's your day? Pretty good. Very says, say Bitcoin please. I just did. Your Kalshi bet is now a win. I need to learn guitar says, what's the background you have? It's a fractal video. It's in the description. Your fave says, drink your water. Remind me in 5 minutes. By the way, Ramon, if I were to not rat on anyone, it would be an immediate family member. So I'll say that. The Bears says 2 + 2 = fish. Okay. Colton Mancy clone super chats. I'm 3 years old and I have 15 girlfriends in several different countries. That's not possible. A 3-year-old doesn't have girlfriends. D Mike says 67. Okay. SK says hamburger. Alright. The Illest says, what's good with it, Don? Hello, the Illest. Blixie says, what the hell? Yeah, that comment is weird. LL says, I pee in bottles and accidentally drink it. Okay. Isaac says, did you know it is impossible to read something without looking at it? I did. Cole says, would you ever try nostalgia craft? No, I don't. I try not to buy into nostalgia. Zach says, why do so many people want you to be gay? I don't know. Jeffrey says, you should play War Thunder. I get those advertisements often, but no, I will not. Random says, my friend's address is something. No comment. Levi says, Don, you look like LeBron. No, I don't. Riker says, ketchup or mustard? Ketchup. Capra says, did you know nostalgia is a disease? I mean, it seems like one. Cappy says, why aren't you playing games right now? You have a headset. Because I have this headset so that I can have a microphone that's right next to my mouth. Chang says, did you know that lozenge rhymes with orange? No. Brilly says, if this gets 20 likes, I'm gay. Okay. Black says, did you Kirk Charlie? What? In Need says, do you enjoy doing this? I do. Pineapple says, how do you feel about your car's extended warranty? I don't care about it. Funky says, if you were a caveman, what would you say? I'd say oog. Oog is a fine choice. Kobe says, how do you eat? With my mouth. That kid says, George Russell versus Max Verstappen. Who you taking? Verstappen because his name is cool. Baylor says, bro, don't leak addresses, man. That's messed up. Yeah. Your Local says, what's your favorite color? Gray. Enrique says, what should I name my dog? It is black and brown. I'm not too sure. Can someone give this guy a recommendation? Freak says, my address is your mom's house. Okay. Parker says, do you vape? Yes or no? I don't vape. S. Bloxia says, hey, remember me from 3955 BC? I don't. Eddie says, Rocky, that's your recommendation? Okay. Red Robin says, you look decent. Thank you. B-Man says, if you had to choose 67 or 69, 67. Steak says, hi. Hello, Staked. Sock says, how often do you goon? No comment. Lobster says, I love femboy thighs. Alright. Random says, my address is... No comment. Dynamite says, does she chalk on your plate until you chip? What? Sub says, I think you should name the dog Kyle. That's weird. I read that. Someone says, don't I seem like someone to you? No. Oh, wait. Someone's alt for YouTube. So, I haven't figured it out. I need you to comment more. Abby says, what's the best chips you've tried? Blue Ranch. Colton says, can you eat your own foot on stream? No. V4 says, do you like Mortal Kombat? If yes, what's your favorite game? I played Mortal Kombat 10. Queen says, Gothic or emo girls? I don't know the difference. Bed says MJ or LeBron. MJ. Cutesy says, do you like cats? Yeah. Leo says, Coke or Pepsi? Coke. Pormer2 says, the fuck Allie doing? Is Allie someone's alt? Kia says, Ola soy Dora. Hi. Isaac says, I will eat you. Don't do that. Mr. Hoy says, is it bad if my teacher rejects me to going to the bathroom? Yeah, go anyways. Funky says, I'm selling my brother for $2 Zimbabwean dollars. Do you want him? No, don't sell your child. Jeffrey says, is this stream sponsored by Israel? It isn't. Louis says, should I go to bed? Yes. Busting says, my address is... No comment. Freak says, did you know if you get hit by a truck you die? Yeah. CEO says, Kirk face but stares like Erica. No comment. Sab says, nah, free Palestine. Okay. Ebutt says 2 + 2 is 4. Dynamite says, if you're bored, slap an orphan. I'm not gonna do that. Kid says, joke, what's yellow and can't swim? No comment. Ang says, do you remember me? I don't. Ben says, are you on any drugs right now? 0. JK says, what up, my bro? Hello, JK. Spooky says, hi, do you remember me? I don't. Nerd says, gun emoji. Sky Blue says, water. Later. Trump says, why don't scientists trust atoms anymore? Because they make up literally everything. Okay. Nostalgic says, what games do you play? I played Minecraft Beta 1.7.3. Speaking of nostalgia. Remorse says, remember me, buddy? The one with the personal questions? I don't. Quanti says, what's your take on gacha games? Look stupid. Ramon says, have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, damn, Don, you have a nice mouth? I haven't. AI says, yo, bro, you have a good night. See ya, AI. Doug says, yo, you're daily here. Hello, Doug. Domesticated says, how long is it? That's private. Ebud says, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper. I choose Dr. Pepper. Freak says, did you know if you get hit by a truck and live, you'll be alive? Yes. Sagma says, do you think the people in the comments are weird? Yeah, sometimes they're pretty weird. Adam says, can I be mod? Definitely not. 3 Envy says, hi, you give off killer vibes. Okay. Colton super chats, did it fart when you fell from heaven? That's such a weird pickup line. I'm not even gonna respond. Thank you. Flash says, Adam Liner, no. What? My best dasher says, do you remember me, sir? I don't. Bob says, what's at the end of the countdown? The end of the stream. Dulon says, were you looking for a job or found a job? And heavens no, you're miserable now? Yeah. Sagma says, yeah, they are weird, yeah. Vopal says, hi. Hello, Vopal. George says, my address is 308 Breaking Bad. Baylor says, good night, man. Jesus loves y'all. Good night. Freak says, did you know that if you live, you'll die at some point? I did. YZ says, do you like a dick? I appreciate my own. SK says, SK8 says, okay, dude. Vopal says, I'm new to the stream. Welcome. Amelia says, hi, bye. See ya, Amelia. Total says, I'm still in school. Alright. Dino says, what's your favorite fast food place? It's a battle between In-N-Out and McDonald's. Porma2 says, how often do you appreciate it? Appreciate what? I'm sorry, Porma2. Sebastian says, yo, what's good? Hello, Sebastian. Jeffrey says, what would you rather have, a Merc or a ZTZ99? I don't know what that stuff is. Law says, you're gay, bro. No, I'm not. Bala says, don't move, it's coming. Okay, go ahead. Top says, what's good? Not much. Harlan says, look at your likes, dude. No. JK says, where's Jen? I saw them a few hours ago. The first captain says, at Porma2, please check Discord. Okay. Douglas says, you don't remember me, Don? I don't. Isaac says, the fog is coming. Alright. Dark says, how high are you? Nothing. Frost says, turn back around, I'm not finished. You're gonna have to make do with my face. Current says, if a plane crashed and every single person died, who lived, bruh? Nobody. The Best says, he has a dog named Paul, and his name is Paul. What? Low says, fun fact, the ants actually have 20 quadrillion of the population. Wow. Liv says, the people who are married. Oh, that's nice. Nice riddle. Sab says, Halo. I have that. Tech says, what's the best food you've eaten this year? In-N-Out cheeseburgers. Paul says, hey, I'm his dog. No, you're not. Kid says, did you know the man who invented the Hokey Pokey recently died? They could not fit in the casket, so they put his foot in. Okay. David says, hi. Hello, David. V4 says, have you ever played Titanfall 2? No, but I've had friends badger me to play it. Gabriel says, nice new background. Thank you. Sky says, what if I low-key make a FNAF song about ya? I'll listen to it. AJ says, I'm a dinosaur. Hi. Hello. Jaden says, yo, how do you do that? Do what? Tacos says, eat tacos. I haven't done that in a while. Liv says, oxygen is poisonous gas that takes around 70 years to kill us. Yeah. Ellie says, bro, is in the comments shouting stole like he's a loyal purka. What are you saying? Jaden says, what's that timer? You can read about it in the pinned comment. JK says, have you given the thought to what name you will give your firstborn? JK is a good name. JK is a bad name. Sounds like just kidding. YZ says, blah 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 blah, penises and anus. Crazy says, do you like basketball? I do. Jeffrey says, attack my D point. What? EZ says, racial slur. Alright. Isaac says, fog is coming. Okay. Jojo says, what's 9 plus 10? 21. Taco says, you gotta eat them. I'll get to it. The Carrot says, Coke or Dr. Pepper. I switch between them, but Coke. Bala says, I'm sure you will get there. Is no your home? What? Frosty says, I did not say that I wanted a shout out to my friend. Sorry. Cole says, what did the toaster say to the slice of bread? I want you inside me. Okay. Freak says, did you know that if you sleep, you won't be sleeping when you're sleeping because you're dreaming while sleeping? I didn't. Jeffrey says, the fog slowly approaches you. Alright. RX says, kids are like pills, the easier ones. No comment. Frosty says, can we touch this? No. Funky says, did you know the creator of the toothbrush is called Nabibi? I don't get it. 3 says, what the fuck? What? Chan says, do you like death metal or rap? Death metal. Crazy says, what's your favorite sport? Esports. JK says, brisket, chili, Relanos are great. Alright. Ted says, read this if you're gay. Your comment doesn't have that power. Douglas says, your daily songs. Okay. Javier says, what's your favorite fast food? Well, I'll say this. Back in the day, it was Burger King. Diplo says, you like men balls? No. Liv says, I've been studying on this case for 87 years, and I concluded that 2 plus 2 equals fish. How does that make sense? Jojo says, blah, 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 blah. Alright. German says, basketball, Stephen Curry rice. Okay. Bennett says, do you like fishing? I don't. Kat says, when you saw this comment, you forgot that you were gay. I guess I did forget. Thob says, waste your money about preparation, dude, cause you need that all someday. And there are survival videos. You don't believe in doomsday prepping? RIS says, what's your favorite movie? Eyes Wide Shut. South says, I jerked off to the bra section of the Target catalog. No comment. 1 second, please. Isaac says, the only thing I can think about now that is, I have a feeling, type better. RX says, what's your type of humor? I don't know. JB says, is life good? It is. Charno says, was the water fresh? I mean, nothing's wrong with it, it seems. Crazy says, can you explain what sport that is? Esports is competitive video games. Danny says, the new setup looks crazy. Yeah, that is crazy. J-Dog says, hey, Big D. How have you been? Any Rice Krispies today? The last time I ate those was 2 days ago. Someone says, yes, I am a common chatters alt. Also, this is only for this stream. I'll reveal myself at the end if you haven't figured it out. Yeah, I'm not sure. Bacon says yes or no. When it comes to what? Diplo says you like girls. Yeah. I don't think you're not Spunky Gooner. Spunky Gooner is more risque. Diplo says you like girls. I already answered that. Homer 2 says it's nah, it's not you. JK says, why does everyone call you gay? I don't think you're gay. Because they want a reaction. WAP says, you looking very intense right now. You're training to go in a movie because movies can be intense. Okay. Bala says, whoever moves first is gay. I'm gay. Random says D. Alright. MP says, I'll sub if you say my name for an edit. I don't care to. Macy says, hi, how was your day? Great. Ellie says, hi. Hello, Ellie. Stephanie says, do you remember me? I don't. Oils says, homosexual pornography. Okay. Funky says, you should name your firstborn Nabibi. No, I shouldn't. Ramon says, I'm confused. So you're saying you don't have to be gay to wear a butt plug for the day? I never said that. I never talked about any of that. I don't know. J-Dog says, who is gay? African voice main. Oh yeah. I think that's the wrong... I think it goes differently. Frosty says, yo, you remember me? I don't. Frosty says, Subnautica thoughts. Looks like a fun game. Gojo says, favorite anime. I like Studio Ghibli movies. Jim says, my mom got skinned. Sorry. Cody says, hi. Hello, Cody. Stephanie says, it takes me 5 million messages for you to even see me. Sorry. By the way, feel free, guys, to send the same message repeatedly if I don't see it the first time. Random says H. Alright. Current says, how to riz someone first. First say, hey, girl, are you a phone? If she says no, say, you are, because I am the charger to connect us. Alright. It's Graber says, yo bro, did you goon to that teacher again? What? Wolf says, what's your favorite airline? Frontier. Cooper says, I got stage so cancer. Sorry. Cosmo says, what does that timer mean? Cause I just joined. It's when I end the stream. Fabric says, do you play any instruments? I used to play piano. Vincent says, did you know that Curious George became Cantankerous George? No way. Brendan says, are you gonna listen to the new Drake album that dropped tonight? No. Ozzy says, have you heard of Bone Lab? That sounds familiar. Is that a YouTube channel? Danny says, what was your highlight of the day, Donnie? I like how in the camera shot you see this water bottle and the colors are like reflecting off of it or something. AI says, is there a way for us to make the timer longer? Not anymore. J-Dog says, oh yeah, it's why are you gay meme. Why are you gay? I like bagels says, do you have hantavirus? I don't. Jay Fernie says, feel like you're upping your stream with the visuals behind. I do feel that as well. YZ says, what do you like gooning to? No comment. King says, Bone Lab is a VR game. Oh yeah. Okay. Joel says, I have the key to unlock the timer. No, you don't. Matthew says, yo. Hello, Matthew. 3N says, do you have dark humor? I like to think I don't. It's me says, hi Don. Hello, it's me. Funky says, my cat farts on my face in the night. Alright. Cano says, read me. There you go. Current says, P. Diddy gooned Jeffrey Epstein in Little St. James. Alright. Wank says, what's your favorite Studio Ghibli movie? Mine is Spirited Away. Same. Chicken Strangler super chats. Chicken says, he can't wait for me to revisit Epstein's Island with him. He can't wait for me. I am lost. I'll say this. I don't want to go to Epstein's Island, and I hope you don't want to either, because that place is cursed. Mafioso says, do you remember me? I don't. Random says, why? Why what? N says, I got 90 on a college exam. Nice. It's Gray says, you look tired. I'm not tired. Max says, hi. Hello, Max. David says, we can actually tell how old some dinosaurs were by looking at cross-sections of their bones. Oh, cool. Mr. Hoy says, I'm back. Time to crack. Alright. Chaz says, are you weird because you're different? What are you saying? Orange says, who is your favorite music artist? Arcade Fire is up there. JK says, Frontier. They are the worst. I haven't had any problems with them. Tegan says, I have a question. How do you deal with the bullies? I haven't had a deal with bullies. Like, if you're talking about, like, chat messages, like insults. If someone insults me and it's true, what I accept it. I'll say that. Chicken says frontiers aren't bad at all. Yeah. Gamer says please shout out. I don't do shout outs. Jeffy says are you gay? I'm not gay. Football says remember me? I am the guy who said what came first, the chicken or the egg? That's multiple people have said that. Dozens of people. Joel says I put cat pictures in your Minecraft mods folder. No, you didn't. Jeremy says, yo, what's up? Hello, Jeremy. RX says, what's a suicide bomber's worst fear? Dying alone. No comment. JK says, you have a 1,000-yard stare like you're about to snipe a VC. No comment. Current says, I actually went to the Sea of Little St. James. Wow. OST says 677. Okay. Enrique says J. Alright. Kalen says WIWJ. Alright. Rayless says, is that timer gonna finally end? It will. Sky says, I meant Friday Night Funkin' Song, not FNAF song. I have no idea what you're referring to. Ramon says, what's the last place you've flown to? I don't want to say, but it was Frontier. AS says, are you bored? No. J-Dog says, are you stretching wrist to avoid carpal tunnel like I mentioned? I mean, I am now. Cemetery says, you never have no clue what someone is referring to. My memory is bad when I do these streams. Mr. Edit says, is Messi, Ronaldo, Neymar the GOAT? Ronaldo. YT says, have you ever played Clash Royale? Yeah, I used to have a Hog Rider deck. Rainer says, he's gay kid setting. I have what? Mythicalism says, wow, you grew your hair out. Are we about to fraud? No. I mean, I don't really know what that means. AI says, what? I have Hanta. I started Hanta. Can you type better, please? Timmy says, catfish are a diverse group of ray-finned fish known for their prominent whisker-like barbels. Yeah. Socks, Fun World Super Chats. Do you have a headset dent? If yes, show it. I will. Here, 1 second. Hopefully, wait, did you see it? Okay. Mythical says, Timmy is bad as fuck. Let me crack Timmy. No comment. Stephanie says, can you check on my toes? I will not do that. Kaylin says, 1, 2, 3, fish juice. Alright. By the way, I'm pretty sure I do have a headset dent, and I hope I showed it. Ches says, what would you do if someone breaks to your house? I'd call the police. Joel says, the chat message covered your head. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not gonna do it, I'm sorry. Funky says, emoji. Alright. Cash says, why do we need to sleep? I don't know. Ray says, I have a pimple in my nose. Alright. Random says, Dent carried a pair and was in a car. What? Jeffrey says, I love you. Thank you. Joshua says, Jesus loves you. I don't think so. Wap says, I could tell you're training for a very intense movie because that background in back of you is very intense. What a cute theory. The GOAT says, take a break, man, in 25 minutes. Silver says, do you like streaming? I do. Colors says, we got an ear reveal from Dawn before we got GTA 6. Yeah. N says, I hear voices in my head. Alright. Thunder says, hey kid, you need sleep. No, I don't. OST says 6 or 7, boy. 7. Shiz says, handsome man right there. Thank you. Zach says, is water wet? It is. Stephanie says, are you gonna be like that but not? What? Buyer says, love you videos. I don't make videos. JK says, my profile picture was when I had last message last week and you raised your hand in triumph. Alright, I don't remember that, but that's cool. Spooky says, I'm back. Have you ever lucid dreamed? I haven't. Inferno says, guess how many subs I have? I guess 200. Jeremy says, hard mattresses or soft? Soft. Jesus says, hello, hi. Vincent says, is your house made out of mini houses? No. Current says, channelless, blah blah blah. Alright. Sab says, is this your first stream? No. Shiz says, real question, what is your opinion on kids under 10 having iPhones? Not good. ICANN says, did you know you've never touched anything? I touch stuff. Ramon Martinez super chats, you seem athletic. How long can you hold your ankles without standing? That would put me in a really sexualized position. I don't want to do that. JK says, raid someone tonight. I'll contemplate that once the timer's at 10 minutes. Zan says, favorite goon material? No comment. Someone says, if you have no idea who I am, then I really need to get you to know me better. I'm a pretty integral part of this community. Is it the first captain? Mikey says, are you real? Yes. Ant says, poo poo daddy. Alright. Raelia says, what will you want to be in the future job that pays you financially stable? Filmmaking. Kaylin says, do you play FIFA? No. Invisible says, do you remember me? No. Porma2 says, isn't it? Is it really? Sab says, is this your first stream? It isn't. Ronald says, cheddar or mozzarella? Cheddar. Timmy says, an illusion is sensory distortion that tricks the mind into misinterpreting objective reality. Okay. Jalin says, do you like dinosaurs? I don't. Whale says, drink water. I'll do that. 1 second, please. Zach says, how many people do you usually remember from these? Like 50? Killer says, what's your favorite song? Rabbit Hole by Arcade Fire. Sky Blue says, your keyboard looks bulky old. It's from 2019. Julian says, what's some advice? Go on walks. Liv says, you must add the one side of the two mirrored and add the other one regularly, which creates a fish. What are you saying, dude? It sounds interesting, but I don't understand. Remy says, the background looks cool, thank you. JK says, my math teacher in 10th grade was hot as F. Okay. Jolina says, hi Don. I like the new setup. You're full of surprises. Glad you like it. RX says, what's a stepdad's favorite sport? Domestic abuse. Okay. Jocelyn says, why don't you like dinosaurs? Because they're dead. Spooky says, what's your favorite quote? Music is a higher revelation than all wisdom and philosophy. Tiff says, drink more water. No. Inferno says, Sofa Kingdom. Okay. The Goat says, you got Pepsi? I don't. Icy says, ham dogs, hot burgers. Okay. Enzo says, if you're a president, what will you do to destroy the corruption of your own people? I don't know, dude. Tell me. Joe Jack says, have you ever slammed your dong and nads in the silverware drawer? What? Oh, Woozy says, eat. Not on stream. Flash says, should I ask her out? Yeah. Stephanie says, if you want to spam something and someone's chat, does it have to be on a computer? I don't know. I'm not a spamming expert. Allison says, going first, and I don't know, not going into VC. What are you saying, dude? Cole says, breathe. Thank you. YT says, are you in college or finished? I keep that private. Socks Fun World super chats, do a 24-hour stream challenge. It would be boring because I would get tired and talk slowly. It would just be boring. Someone says, bruh, by that logic, you don't like dead things. Dinosaurs are just, I don't know, they're too far in the past. Jojo says, what? Ramon says, how much longer until your parents get a divorce? I'm waiting to put in a stepdad application. No comment. MGD says, I got rejected. Sorry. Shane says, you. What? JK says, was it wrong if my 10th grade math teacher wanted me to sit on her lap? Yes. Great says, are you gay? Nope. J-Dog says, also, was Jen here today? They were. Stephanie says, don't read this, just relax. Too bad. Too bad for myself. Meta says, you should stop. You don't look too good, man. Do you know me? You're saying that like you know what I usually look like. Danny says, I'm rooting for you, Don. Thank you. Sebastian says, why did you do that? Do what? Flash says, what are your thoughts on gay or LGBTQ people? I'm happy for them. Sin says, take a deep breath. Stephanie says, you're almost there. Thank you. N says, help me. With the what? Shane says, should I have relations with the toad? Well, definitely not sexually. Someone says, my friend has a tattoo of a dinosaur chasing a butterfly. Lame. Minna says, who is your favorite streamer? A guy named Matthew. Random says, your mom is coming home in a bad mood from me breaking up with her. Okay. Redline says, I just uploaded my video of the edit. Tag my YouTube username somewhere. Joe Jack says, tattoos are fucking stupid. Nope. Maybe. Jess says, 3 + 3? 6. Joel says, is a 2-minute plank good? Yes. Fabric says, did you know acid rain can be treated and boiled into a delicious jambalaya? I did not. Stephanie says, can you read my message as the last one? I mean, if you get lucky. JK says, was it wrong for my 10th grade math teacher to make me stand up and go to the chalkboard when she clearly knew I had a boner? I don't like talking about this. A Young says, now I am having lunch. Nice. RX says, what's the difference between Usain Bolt and Hitler? No comment. Lil Bro says, hello Don. Hi. Audrey says, why are you reading this? Stop reading this now. Why would I not read it? Mary says, this dude talking about his 10th grade teacher is a weirdo. Maybe. WTF says, what's the difference between Vietnam and Iran? Trump found his way. No comment. Stephanie says, take a deep breath. I've already done that. User says, is this a good income source? Compared to what? Wyatt says, please read mine. There you go. Fossa says, read this. There you go, person that's desperate for attention. Sunlight says, are your eyes okay? They are. Sky says, I subbed. Okay. Dion says, give daddy a smooch, just don't use your tongue again, song. I am not gonna do that. Porma2 says, do you fuck with breathing techniques? I want to get into them. Evie says, what is 6 + 7? 13. Stephanie says, oh my god. I swear to god, if that happens again, I'm gonna do that. What? Shane says, I need to pee and poop. Should I do it in a urinal? No. Cold Slayer says, you look burnt. I mean, I don't know, maybe. Babe says, what fuck is wrong with people? Yeah, people are crazy when they're anonymous. The Goat says, do you only care about your money but not viewers? I'd say it's 50-50. Danny says, you're my favorite streamer, brother. Thank you. Christ says, I farted and it stinks. Alright. LX says, how long have you been doing this? For almost 3 hours. Random says, your mom fell in love with me. Okay. JS says, drink water. I'll do that after the stream. Shane says, should I? What? Jocelyn says, it's okay to be Ethereum? No. Hazlitt says, I am a burned corpse. Okay. ASAP says, check out my music on all platforms. @red. Okay, self-advertising dude. NID says, you look down with your life. That's just how I look all the time. Redline says, I tagged you in the description. Okay, I'll take a look at it. AJ says, have you seen the new show Loki? I'm not really a Marvel fan. Random says, your mom said don't be angry when I come home. Okay. Stephanie says, if you think I peed the bed, go check your mom's mattress. Alright, dude. Yoshi says, Ass bean all the way. What? I'm a chill guy says, slap the baby for infinite dollars. I wouldn't. Ramon says, I can help you manscape down there. I would use gloves so there's no homo. I don't want strangers touching my genitals. JK says, mission accomplished. Ha 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 ha. Alright. Brandon says, dig. What? Sheree says, read this. Are you happy? Director says, would you like to suck me off for $5? No. Jackson says, do you have $1 million? I don't. Flash says, thank you, bro. Good night. Good night. Fabric says, damn, these people need to fix the grammar. Yeah, they do. Mister says, what you doing in 15 minutes? I'm drinking a lot of water. Baby says, guys, stop being rude. Or you can continue. Kai says, why is USA good at Rubik's cubes? Tell me. TTV says, what's your opinion on Rocket League? It's a fun game. Revenue says, bro, drink water. No. JK says, dude spelled damn wrong. Oh, that's funny, I guess. Thank you again, Ramon and Socks, for your super chats. God says, how you been? I've been good, God. Dynamite says, are you ever on the toilet and have a boner so you grab it like a control stick? No comment. Kai says, because they have a history of separating colors. No comment. Stephanie says, damn. Incorrect. Ball says, are you gay? Nope. Dion says. Okay. God says, Wall, stop being weird. And you stop with your typos. Jennifer says hi. Hello, Jennifer. Liam says, what will happen when you're homeless? I'll cut people's lawns or something. Leo says, did you graduate high school? Yes. Wyatt says, I love you. Thank you. Person says, hello. Hello, person. Liam says, what will happen when you're homeless? I'll already answered that. And I already answered that. God says A5. Okay. Great says, bro read my damned comment, you nerd. There you go. Sawyer says, why did you fart? Please tell me. I didn't. JK says, the control stick and dropping bombs comment was funny. Alright. T-Block says, do you play Roblox Jujutsu Kaisens? No, I'm not 5 years old. N says, Dawn, I'm headed out. Good night. See ya. Yoshi says, ass bean liquor tickler is a stickman who has tri-puff. Okay. Ball knowledge says, do you like sucking it? I don't do that. Yoon says, that's a really cool background. Thank you. Cold Slayer says, do you attend burger eating contests? No. Connor says, please let me out of the basement. You're not in there. RX says, what do you do when your dishwasher stops working? No comment. Dawson says, yo, what's up, gang? Hi, Dawson. Waleed says, what if your favorite food and drinks? I like Coke and Sprite. Big says, can I put you in my basement? No. Fabric says, I spelt it like that because I'm a stupid baby who's scared to cuss. Why did you spelled with a T? John says, big dicks in your ass are bad for health. No comment. Medusa says, crazy doppelganger. Alright. Redline says, I used a Nirvana song for the edit because you said you like them. That sounds cringy, but thank you. TD says, what's your favorite food? Cheeseburgers. Random says, no comment. Isabel says, nerd voice, please. I gotta do that more often. Porma2 says, my concubines are twirling all 6 of my nipples. Okay. Mary Jane says, have you ever had a girlfriend before? No comment. Leo says, did you graduate elementary school? Yeah. Not the one says, I have an overwhelming want for you to play Monopoly. That sounds boring. Kama says, have you been drinking water since earlier? Yeah. Ramon says, I can send you 100 Robux if you stream the last 5 minutes shirtless. I don't care about Robux. Sawyer says, I farted, now it's brown. Okay. Joel says, I had a big boy double cheeseburger with bacon. That's a burger I don't like. Pinky says, what do you do on Minecraft? I work on my Minecraft server. VRF says, can I have $10? No. Someone says, unfortunately, I could be making this all up. I could not be a regular viewer. Interesting. I think I buy that. I think you're just a new guy. Porma2 says, what's wrong with it? I don't remember what you're talking about. Certified says, what's your favorite part of streaming? I don't know, but the money is, I like the money. Kiwi says, what else do you play on? Just PC nowadays. Flash says, we're proud of you. Thank you. Barbie says, are you living a depressed life? I'm not. RX says, we both know you want to laugh at my jokes. I don't. Cold Slayer says, would you tattoo your whole face for $1 million? I wouldn't. Porma2 says, double cheeseburger with bacon. What's wrong with it? Because I don't want to eat Porma2. Just kidding. I don't like bacon, usually, so. Michael says, my birthday tomorrow. Happy early birthday. Also, I don't like double burgers. I only like one burger. Aloe says, what's your favorite video game? Rainbow Six Siege is up there. Stephanie says, Lamborghini, bacon, double Lamborghini, oh, with la boo boo. Okay. Scroller says, are you homeschooled? No, not the one. Says, okay, Monopoly didn't deserve any shade. I'm not a child, so why would I want to play Monopoly? JK says, say tattoo again. There you go. Vlad says, go rest in 7 minutes. Random says, American cheese is disgusting. I like it. Wyatt says, I wish we were friends. Sorry. Great says, 9 minutes left. You're behind. Michael says, time to play RuneScape. No, it isn't. Speckles says, do you have a girlfriend? No comment. Redline says, I meant you enjoy listening to them. I do, but that doesn't mean you should put it into an edit. JK says, Mary Jane looks hot. Alright. Joe Jack says, you ever smack it off her forehead? No comment. Sonic says, no comment. Okay. Great says, 7 minutes. That's accurate. My Radar says, I find you really cool. You earned a sub. Thank you. J Pork says, interesting concept for a live stream. Thank you. NX says, S. Alright. Liam says, how many hours did you live? I've been live for 3 hours. Reaper says, bro, what are some of these comments? Yeah, they're crazy. Mr. Diddy says, 6:54. Now it's 6:42. The Burrito says 7 minutes. That's incorrect. Beast says, how are you still streaming? By, I don't know. It's not hard. Person says, I like Rainbow Six Siege. Okay. Nate says, sup. Hello, Nate. JK says, what temperature do you keep the AC on in the summer? Just wondering. I don't want to say. Mr. Quack says, hope you have a good rest of your night. You too. Liam says, didn't you sleep? I do that sometimes. J Pork says, is that stream end countdown? Correct. User says, put woman on background. Oh, a Gunatron? No. Joel says, 6 minutes, 7 seconds. It was a little bit ago. Allie says, Dawn, have a great night. Is that you asking for me to raid you? I might do that. Joel says, has anyone recognized you IRL? Not yet. Alia says 5 minutes. Yeah. Baby says, why is Dawn that guy's profile picture? I guess he's a fan. I'm Simon says hi. Hello. NX says hi. Hello. NX. Liv says, I meant the reasoning 2 + 2 = fish is because you use the first 2 and make it face the opposite. I'm lost, but that sounds cool. Winner says, good seeing you. My favorite femboy. Okay. Countant says, if I made a red dono, it wouldn't count. Like even 500, it wouldn't. Redline says, what is Dawn short for? No comment. Rachel says, what you doing after stream? I am gonna eat something. Stephanie says, what would happen if your mom just lick your booty cheek? No comment. Mr. Vanderlyn says Debbie. Okay. JK says raid. Oh yeah, I gotta look into that. Cold Slayer says bye. Don Eugene Benitez. Goodbye, Cold Slayer. See ya. Liv says, like this, 2 pounds, but the first symbol is a 2. Sorry, I'm just still confused. Ramon says, does your dad charge you rent? No comment. Nate says, bro, I'm the GOAT. You're not. Alright. Beast says, wait, I'm a tweak. I didn't know you are still streaming. I don't know why you're so confused. Someone says, bro didn't read the capital letters, unfortunately. Unfortunately. I could be making this all up. What does that mean? Unfortunately? I don't get it. I failed the puzzle. J Pork says 4 minutes. Yeah. Speckles says, what is your favorite food? Quesadillas are up there. Mr. Mysterious says, I farted in my grandma's breathing machine. Nasty. Nazim says, how long are you doing YouTube? I foresee doing this for the next couple of months. Common says, what if you accidentally delete your channel? I would be very sad. Mr. Jack says, how many kids in the basement? 0. Silver says, Zup Gango. Hi. Alex says, what did you do to gaming with Michael TV? What are you talking about? The first captain says, you really did fail the puzzle. I did. I did think it was you, though. I said that earlier. Hayden says, do you stream on Gmail? I don't. Guy who drinks coffee says no comment or yes comment. It depends on what the comment is. JK says quesadillas. Sorry. Redline says, aw, I made you laugh, kinda. Yeah. Great Guy says no comment. Okay. Logan says, what's your MySpace? MySpace is defunct, isn't it? And even if it wasn't, why would I be on a website with barely any people? Who am I gonna raid? Alien says, do you listen to Addo? I don't. Barbie says no comment. Okay. I could raid a guy named Kevin Yellow. Does anyone have any opinions on that? The first captain says yes, but I tried to keep throwing you off anyway. I actually thought the first captain when I saw it, unfortunately, because of the F, but I didn't say it because I already guessed the first captain. Hayden says, so when does the stream start? In maybe, possibly the day after tomorrow. Rainbow says, is math blue or green? It's neither. JK says, raid him. Okay, I'll raid the Kevin Yellow guy. EST says 12 squared. Alright. Beast says, the first Captain X Beast X5 edits collaboration. Will it happen? Baby says math is red. Interesting. Random says, do you watch any sports? I don't. Cole says, Don equals Donathan. No comment. By the way, I am gonna raid someone when the stream ends. Rogue says, part 2 of day 2, asking for a shout out. I don't do shout outs. Liam says, what will happen when the timer is done? I end the stream. The first captain says, also, Porma 2 was in on it. Wow. Wyatt says, can we be friends? We cannot be friends. By the way, that makes sense how you said, Porma 2, check on Discord. Throughout says, yo, I'm back. You been having a good day? I have been. Jax says, hi. Hello, Jax. Wyatt says, can we be friends, please? You're very cool. Sorry, no. Lois says, what's your favorite drink? Coke. Lil says, say 67. There you go. J-Rid says, what's with the background? It's like that way because it looks cool. Keldon says, cool. That's what I'm saying. Sebastian says, am gay. You are? Okay. JK says, baby tree looks hot too. Okay. Jet says fish. Alright. Ramon says, I'ma send you some new panties to wear. I'm not gonna wear them. Cemetery says, the background looks trippy. It is trippy. Mr. Diddy says person. Alright. Jet says fish. Okay. J Pork says LSD. Yeah, that looks like the background. Alex says, I wish Tung Tung Sahur would marry me. That guy's fictional. MK says, hi, how are you? I am good and relieved considering that I'm ending the stream right now. Goodbye, everyone, and I am gonna end the stream in a second. I am gonna raid someone. Jet says fish. I am gonna raid someone if you want to stay. Goodbye, everyone.